Chapter 381, Systematic Training. The classrooms, illuminated by bright torches, exuded an aura of mystery, accentuated by the suits of armor positioned every 10 feet along the walls. Neville's sharp screams echoed through the slightly empty large room, causing unease among the young wizards. They instinctively huddled in the center of the classroom, trying to distance themselves from the usual, yet oddly unsettling armor in this setting. Cho Chang was one of the few Ravenclaw students who hadn't abandoned Professor Blaine's physical education class. Her close friends had long since given up on it. At this moment, Cho, with pale lips, subconsciously searched the crowd for someone she could rely on. She spotted Harry, but seeing Hermione huddled next to him made her hesitate to approach. "Is Professor Blaine going to have us fight these armors?" a Hufflepuff student wondered aloud. The Hufflepuff students were the most numerous, lacking the courage of Gryffindor, the wisdom of Ravenclaw, the ambition of Slytherin, and the desire for power, but they possessed the rare quality of perseverance. Cedric's low voice betrayed a hint of fear, but Cho seemed to find reassurance in his presence. Her eyes, like the reflection of autumn water, were filled with worry. "But what are we going to do with the armor?" I left my wand in the dormitory." "Don't worry," Cedric replied, his face pale but still maintaining a gentlemanly demeanor. He offered Cho a reassuring smile and then vigilantly eyed the armor, which seemed eager to move. "These things don't seem too fast. Perhaps Professor Blaine trained us to run so we can escape the armor's pursuit smoothly?" Fred and George overheard Cedric's comment and exchanged a contemptuous look. Last semester, Cedric's Quidditch team had defeated Gryffindor, and the Weasley twins still remembered the grievance. "Doesn't feel good, does it, bro?" Fred remarked, frowning. "I remember we trapped Filch's cat in the armor 3 times. Could it be our turn today?" "Actually, it was 4 times, bro," George corrected, shrugging. "Last year, Filch chased you once and let that malnourished cat chase me. I almost couldn't get away. Fortunately, Peeves helped me." Squeak! The classroom door swung open suddenly, and under everyone's gaze, Professor Blaine strode in quickly. He was dressed in the sportswear he reserved for running, not his usual wizard robe. "Now, roll call," he announced. Hermione couldn't shake the feeling that Professor Blaine's demeanor was different today. She couldn't pinpoint the exact change, but he seemed much stricter. 4 distinct groups formed spontaneously. Hufflepuff's group was the largest. Ravenclaw's group, including Cho Chang, consisted of only 4 members. Cho, Susan Bones, Luna, and Parvati Patil's twin sister. The number of Gryffindors and Slytherins was about the same, with the Gryffindors mostly being Harry's friends, Hermione, Ginny, Fred and George, Neville, Parvati Patil, and 2 girls from the Quidditch team. Naturally, Malfoy was present in the Slytherin group. Except for Marcus Flint, who was as large as a gorilla, most of Malfoy's classmates remained. Crabbe and Goyle had long since left, which Harry thought might be why Malfoy didn't provoke him as often in Professor Blaine's class. The Slytherins were known to follow the prevailing winds. "First of all, I want to congratulate you," Professor Blaine began, his hands clasped behind his back. "Over the past month, what you have experienced is both a form of training and a test. Now, all of you standing before me have passed both the test and the training, which means you possess certain qualities that are worthy of cultivation," Professor Blaine declared, his voice commanding the attention of every student in the room. No one whispered. All eyes were fixed on him. "From this moment forward, you will undergo more specialized training. Let me be clear, you will no longer have the option to quit. Each of you must persevere until the final stage of training is complete. This entire process will likely span a year." "But, Professor Blaine," Hermione interjected, her mind racing back to the past month of rigorous exercises and the peculiar armor that adorned the room. "What improvements do you hope we can achieve?" Professor Blaine, a hint of a smile playing on his lips, listened to the murmurs of the young wizards. "You've been pondering this for quite some time, haven't you?" he said, nodding. With his hands clasped behind his back, he paced before them. "For too long, Hogwarts has lacked a structured course to teach young wizards the art of combat." His words sent a ripple of excitement through the students. Their speculations were confirmed. Professor Blaine, renowned for single-handedly defeating nearly 100 werewolves, intended to teach them how to fight. Harry, however, was skeptical. Hogwarts already offered defense against the dark arts, and they had even experienced a dueling class, albeit a farcical one, under the notorious Lockhart. Yet, upon reflection, he realized that defense against the dark arts focused more on countering dark magic and dangerous creatures, while the dueling class had been a mere spectacle. "This class is unprecedented," Professor Blaine continued. "No one knows exactly how to conduct it, so I've devised a curriculum based on my own experiences. You are the inaugural group. If you succeed, this course may become a permanent fixture." "But Professor," Cedric Diggory raised his hand eagerly, "how do you define success? What level of skill must we demonstrate to prove the course's effectiveness?" "An excellent question, Mr. Diggory," Professor Blaine replied, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "I believe success would be demonstrated by defeating a wizard of Professor Black's caliber in a duel." "That's impossible for us," Harry exclaimed, prompting laughter from most of the students. The idea of dueling Professor Black seemed absurd. If they could achieve such a feat, they might as well join Professor Blaine in toppling the Ministry of Magic. "Dreams are essential, Mr. Potter," Professor Blaine said with a smile. "What if they come true?" The laughter grew louder, though Hermione and Luna remained silent, sensing that Professor Blaine was not entirely jesting. "All right," Professor Blaine said, waving his hand to quiet the room. "Time is of the essence. Now, I will introduce you to the specifics of the second phase of training. Incidentally, I used this very method to train myself during my time at Hogwarts. Brace yourselves, you may not enjoy the upcoming exercise." The students eagerly gathered at the back of the classroom where the only wall devoid of armor stood. They watched with anticipation as Professor Blaine drew a bold red line on the floor with his wand. "In simple terms," he explained, turning to face them, "the objective of the second training phase is to traverse the classroom, navigating through the passage obstructed by the armor, relying solely on your speed and reflexes. No wands allowed." The students' gazes shifted to the armor once more, pondering how these suits, acquired by Professor Blaine, would impede their path. As they contemplated, Professor Blaine secured his bag, rolled up his sleeves, and announced loudly, "Pay attention, as I will only demonstrate this once." With a swift motion of his wand, a sharp sound resonated through the room. The piercing sound of footsteps echoed through the classroom as the armored figures along the other three walls suddenly took a step forward with their left feet. In unison, they twisted their waists and raised their right arms, poised as if to throw something. "Look at those armored hands!" exclaimed Harry, the brilliant seeker, his voice tinged with unmistakable fear. His urgent warning drew everyone's attention, and a wave of inexplicable terror swept over the room. "Well, I'll be damned," Fred muttered in disbelief. "So that's what they're for." End of this chapter. Chapter 382, Take Care of Yourself. Ever since Professor Atticus Blaine ventured deep into Slytherin's secret chamber and captured the basilisk that had survived for thousands of years without sustaining any injuries, the young wizards knew that Professor Blaine was a formidable wizard. With the series of events that unfolded over the past year, culminating in Professor Blaine's recent defeat of Greyback and his forces, his power had become deeply ingrained in the minds of the students. However, few young wizards had personally witnessed Professor Blaine's feats, leaving them with only a superficial understanding of the word powerful. Harry recalled a time at the Dursleys' house when Uncle Vernon was watching a Muggle sprint race on TV. While washing dishes in the kitchen, Harry had taken a moment to watch as well. The explosive speed of the tall, burly athlete on TV at the sound of the starting gun had amazed him. Yet, compared to Professor Blaine, Harry felt that the athlete moved as slowly as a wriggling flobber caterpillar. In what seemed like the blink of an eye, Professor Blaine, clad in sturdy attire, appeared nearly 40 feet away. His speed was incomprehensibly fast, almost inhuman. Suddenly, like a torrential downpour, more than 100 suits of armor hurled dung bombs at the running Professor Blaine from the three walls of the classroom. These dung bombs were not thrown slowly. Their trajectory in the air was a straight line, and their speed was so swift that even Harry, a talented seeker, couldn't clearly track their precise positions as they attacked from all directions. "Oh no," Hermione gasped, covering her mouth in shock. In her eyes, a swarm of fast-moving gray figures had already surrounded Professor Blaine. This was no joke. Without magical defense, even Professor Blaine might not withstand such a barrage of dung bombs. But what happened next defied everyone's expectations. A sharp light flashed across Professor Blaine's lavender eyes, and time seemed to slow. He heightened his perception and dynamic vision to the maximum. Leaning, twisting, sliding, and leaping, Professor Blaine moved like an expert stuntman, using incredible maneuvers to dodge the dung bombs that flew at him like cursed spells. Bang, bang, bang. The stench of dozens of exploding dung bombs in the classroom was overwhelming, yet the young wizards were so focused that they were oblivious to the nauseating smell. After evading the first wave of dung bombs, Professor Blaine changed his strategy. Instead of running straight, he moved in a C-shaped arc, a tactic that proved successful. The armor, unable to react in time, missed most of their second wave of throws. Professor Blaine's movements became even more unpredictable. He used evasive maneuvers to mislead the armor into throwing the dung bombs in the wrong direction, while simultaneously dodging those that could hit him. It was as if Professor Blaine had eyes all over his body. No matter where the danger came from, he could always evade it at the last moment. Before the exploding dung bombs could splatter their foul contents on him, he had already moved out of range like the wind. When Professor Blaine leaped into the air, his palm lightly touched the opposite wall, and all the suits of armor retracted their left foot in unison, instantly returning to their original positions. Atticus Blaine stood with an upright posture, surveying the classroom. Small whirlwinds swirled around, efficiently expelling the foul air through the open windows. The sticky juice on the floor seemed to vanish, absorbed into the tiles. In the blink of an eye, the classroom was pristine once more. Atticus wiped the sweat from his forehead, breathing heavily. He recalled the intense effort he had once put into mastering the art of dodging spells in close combat. However, in recent years, the wizards he faced were no match for his prowess, and he had grown accustomed to clearing the field with powerful spells. As a result, his once excellent skills had become somewhat rusty. As Atticus returned to the side of the classroom, the young wizards remained frozen in a state of collective shock. "What's wrong?" he asked, raising an eyebrow and smiling. "Was my performance not impressive enough, or were you all overwhelmed by the stench of dung bombs?" "You seriously think," Susan Bones stammered, her long braid trembling slightly, "that we can do it like you just did?" Parvati Patil chimed in, echoing Susan's disbelief. For these girls, the dung bombs were particularly unbearable. "Well, of course," Professor Blaine replied confidently. "You'll face some challenges at first, but I don't expect you to handle the intensity of the training I just demonstrated. Initially, I'll reduce the attack intensity to 1/3. Once you're accustomed, we'll gradually increase the speed." "We'll never be able to adapt," Parvati declared, her words resonating with many of the young wizards who nodded in agreement. Yet, it was too late to back out. Professor Blaine had made it clear at the start of the class that the option to quit was no longer available. They had no choice but to persevere. "Who wants to try first?" Professor Blaine asked, crossing his arms and casting an intimidating gaze over the students. Even Hermione, usually eager to participate, lowered her head, avoiding his eyes. This reaction was expected, and Atticus was not surprised. After a moment of contemplation, he had an idea. "Potter, Malfoy, Diggory, Cho Chang, the four of you come forward for a demonstration." As anticipated, the four named students wore expressions of dread, as if facing impending doom. Cho Chang, in particular, appeared bewildered, while the rest of the class collectively sighed in relief, grateful to have escaped the spotlight. The chosen students represented Gryffindor, Slytherin, Hufflepuff, and Ravenclaw, and each was a seeker for their respective Quidditch teams. The role of a seeker was crucial, demanding exceptional talent, keen observation, quick reflexes, adaptability, and courage. This trial required the young wizards to exhibit these very qualities. The students from the four houses had never shown such unity. Those not selected retreated to the walls, leaving the four seekers exposed. "What's the matter?" Professor Blaine asked, frowning at their hesitation. "Do you need me to provide each of you with a broomstick?" Harry Potter, one of the chosen, silently wished for his firebolt, a gift from Sirius. With it, he was confident he could excel in this test, outshining Malfoy. Regardless, the four of them couldn't defy Professor Blaine's authority. Reluctantly, they prepared to face the challenge, accepting their fate with a sense of determination. No one present in the classroom that night could escape the ordeal, though the extent of their suffering varied. "Dare you try it, Potter?" The four students stood a few steps away from the red line that Professor Blaine had just drawn. Apart from Cho Chang, who looked pitiful with tears in her eyes, the rest of the young wizards were steeling themselves for the challenge. Harry slowed his breathing, planning to take 2 more steps before the first wave of dung bombs hit. Even if he stumbled in the end, he intended to be closer to the finish line than Malfoy. Just as this thought crossed his mind, Malfoy's irritating voice cut through the air. Harry immediately turned his head to see Malfoy looking at him with a provocative tilt of his pointed chin. "Let's see who goes further," Malfoy taunted. "Mind yourself, Draco." Professor Blaine's calm yet authoritative voice silenced Harry, who was about to retort. Despite the professor's intervention, Harry and Malfoy continued to glare at each other defiantly. "Don't worry, Cho," Cedric said with a reassuring smile. "Just follow me later." "Those words apply to you too, Cedric," Atticus Blaine interjected sternly. "Mind yourself." End of this chapter. Chapter 383, The Horrible Encounter. Professor Atticus Blaine waved his wand once more, and the suits of armor lining the walls prepared to hurl dung bombs. The air grew thick with a tense atmosphere, heavy as lead and mercury. "Harry!" Hermione clutched her chest, her voice filled with concern. Harry turned to offer her a reassuring smile, though it might have been more of a grimace, like the twitch of a cheek during a toothache. Neville and Ginny, equally worried, watched him closely. Fred and George, however, seemed unfazed and even excited. Among the young wizards at Hogwarts, they were perhaps the most familiar with dung bombs and were indifferent to their foul stench. "Prepare," Professor Blaine commanded, raising one hand and making a downward slicing gesture. The other students were puzzled by this odd signal, but Harry recognized it from his days in Muggle school, where a similar gesture was used to start races at sports events. Harry focused intently on Professor Blaine's outstretched palm. The surrounding noise faded away, leaving only the sound of his own heartbeat. This intense concentration reminded him of the moments before catching the golden snitch in a Quidditch match, where everything seemed to slow down, suspended in time. As soon as the professor's hand dropped, Draco, Cedric, and Cho Chang sprang into action. But Harry had already surged forward, crossing the red line 20 feet ahead. Despite his lead, he regretted not having practiced running more. He knew he would soon be pelted with dung bombs. Draco glared at Harry, who was a few steps ahead. Whether it was battling in fairy or rowing, Harry always seemed to come out on top. Even in Quidditch, Draco lagged behind. His pride and self-esteem couldn't bear another loss to Potter, and he was determined to win this time. However, this challenge wasn't just about speed. As Draco plotted his revenge, a dozen dung bombs rained down. Compared to Professor Blaine's earlier demonstration, where dozens of bombs had been launched, this was a lighter assault. With 4 targets now, each student only needed to dodge 4 or 5 bombs. Easier said than done. Draco watched in horror as several bombs hurtled toward him. His mind screamed for him to dodge, but his body refused to comply. In a desperate move, he covered his head, let out a strange cry, and tumbled to the ground. Harry fared no better. He attempted to mimic Professor Blaine's impressive C-shaped maneuver, but lacked the broomstick to aid his agility. He slipped and crashed to the ground with a thud. "Ah!" A piercing scream shattered the air. Cho Chang, unable to react in time, was struck by 3 dung bombs, as if pummeled by heavy fists. The burst of stinky juice left her face pale, and she collapsed onto the sticky ground. Tears splashed everywhere, accompanied by the sound of gagging. "Cho Chang!" Whether it was luck or sheer composure, Cedric managed to stagger and dodge the first wave of attacks. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed Harry and Draco falling almost simultaneously. Cedric immediately halted his progress, turned around, and rushed to Cho Chang's side to help her up. "What are you doing, Mr. Diggory?" Atticus Blaine's voice was sterner than ever. "Do you think this is just a game? A chance to show off your gentlemanly demeanor?" Atticus then turned his cold gaze to Cho Chang, who seemed to have lost her will to fight. "Does the smell of dung bombs make you sicker than the smell of blood? Stand up and walk the rest of the way." Cedric gritted his teeth, preparing to leave Cho's side and continue the challenge, but he was delayed just long enough for the second wave of attacks to reach him. Before he could stand up straight, something struck his forehead, causing his vision to go black as he was knocked off his feet. Professor Blaine's cold reprimand left Cho Chang at a loss. She instinctively obeyed the order, but the sticky, foul-smelling juice sapped her strength. Draco's knees were badly hurt from the first wave of attacks, and Harry's fall left his head numb. Despite this, neither gave up. The crisis they faced drowned out Professor Blaine's reprimands as they struggled to move forward. At this moment, Draco and Harry had completely lost their composure. They resorted to the same foolish tactic, covering their faces with one hand and scrambling forward. This method was unsustainable, and after running less than 50 feet, they were hit by a series of heavy punches and fell. They curled up on the floor, clutching their heads, unable to stand. You can't passively wait for the attack. You must learn to predict and observe your opponent's movements. Atticus ordered the armor to cease its assault and sighed helplessly. Running with your eyes covered is courting disaster. As Harry had anticipated, every young wizard in the classroom that night endured significant hardship. None could last beyond 50 feet, and none of the girls left without tears on their faces. In the future, you don't need to arrive at the Quidditch pitch before 6 o'clock, but you must spend half an hour every day running. Choose your time, keep at it, and I'll know if you've done as I asked," Professor Blaine instructed before dismissing the class. His words made all the young wizards want to cry. Before returning to your respective house lounges, visit the school hospital to have your injuries treated. Madame Pomfrey and I have already communicated, and she will take care of you, Professor Blaine said, returning to his usual friendly tone. He smiled at everyone. "Now you can leave. Harry, stay for a moment. I need to discuss something with you." Many young wizards gave Harry sympathetic looks, except, of course, those from Slytherin. Harry had never been so eager to distance himself from Professor Blaine, but he could only watch helplessly as Hermione and the others hurried out of the classroom. "Professor Blaine," Harry began, trying to appear as weak as possible. "If you want me to try again, I'm afraid. I ache all over." "None of that, Harry," Atticus replied cheerfully. "I didn't expect you all to master it in just a few practice sessions. In fact, I kept you because I have a gift for you, a belated one." End of this chapter. Chapter 384, The Late Gift. Harry blinked, taking several seconds to comprehend what Professor Blaine was saying. Before the end of the second semester of their second year, Professor Blaine had privately rewarded the trio for their active role in the basilisk incident. Hermione received an esoteric magic book, perfectly suited to her tastes. Harry had seen her poring over its contents recently. Ron was given a Merlin commemorative coin, rumored to be quite valuable. Since receiving it, Ron had kept it close, often taking it out to admire. However, Harry hadn't received anything at the time. Professor Blaine had simply told him that a gift would be prepared for him in the future. Last Christmas, Harry received a firebolt. Initially, he and Ron thought it was from Professor Blaine, but they later discovered it was a gift from Sirius. Harry had since stopped dwelling on it, though he couldn't help but feel a twinge of curiosity whenever Hermione delved into her book or Ron fiddled with his coin. Unexpectedly, Professor Blaine brought it up again. Oh, Harry tried to appear modest, but he was genuinely curious about what Professor Blaine might give him. It couldn't be another broomstick, could it? He already owned the best broomstick in the world. If it was related to Quidditch, perhaps it was a complete broomstick care kit? Harry had been eyeing one for a while. Although he could afford it, he was cautious about spending his wealth, given his current inability to earn money. Or maybe it was an elaborate Quidditch match replay model? This model could replay any classic Quidditch match in history and was the latest alchemy product from Light Wheel Company. Harry had been intrigued by it since he first heard about it. However, it was also quite expensive. As he pondered, his mind filled with Quidditch-related possibilities, his favorite sport in the wizarding world. Could it be the key to a house? The thought crossed Harry's mind as he watched Professor Blaine reach into his robes. Sirius had mentioned that Harry would be picked up from the Dursleys during the summer to live in his ancestral home. However, Sirius also said the house now belonged to Professor Blaine, and he only had the right to use it. "Take it, Harry." Professor Blaine finally withdrew his hand, revealing a shiny golden object. He handed it over with a mysterious smile that Harry couldn't quite decipher. Back in Gryffindor Tower, Harry still wore a dazed expression as he passed the portrait of the fat lady. He had Professor Blaine's gift in his pocket, but his mind was preoccupied with the professor's intentions behind the gift. The common room buzzed with its usual noise. Fred and George animatedly recounted Cedric's antics to Lee Jordan and the other young wizards. George mimicked Professor Blaine's reprimand of Cedric, eliciting laughter from everyone. Harry didn't join in. He slipped past them as Hermione waved to him from the sofa. "Where's Ron?" she asked, pointing to the crowded area on the other side of the lounge. She lifted her damp hair, sniffing it cautiously. Although Professor Blaine had removed the smell of feces and eggs from their bodies, the memory lingered for cleanliness-loving girls. The first thing every young witch did upon returning to the dormitory was rush to the bathroom to freshen up. "What's the matter, Harry?" Hermione inquired, wearing a velvet robe. In her yellow pajamas, she pulled up her right trouser leg to her knee. Under the soft candlelight, her fair calf gleamed with a delicate sheen. Unfortunately, a smear of white cream beneath her knee, along with bruises that had yet to fade, marred some of the beauty. "You seem distracted. Why did Professor Blaine keep you here?" she asked. "Oh, it's actually," Harry began, grunting slightly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the item Professor Blaine had given him, starting to explain. 20 minutes later, the crowd gradually dispersed. After hearing numerous jokes, Ron, who genuinely believed that quitting Professor Blaine's physical education class was a we-see decision, walked away from the group. He noticed Harry and Hermione sitting together, whispering, and quickly trotted over to join them. "When did you get back, Harry?" Ron asked, plopping down on the sofa. His eyes widened in surprise when he saw what Hermione was holding. "My God, a gold watch! Where did you get it?" "Professor Blaine's gift to Harry," Hermione replied calmly, glancing at Ron. "This isn't a gold watch, Ron. I just checked it with magic. The case isn't gold, but it is made of a special kind of metal. Moreover, this watch seems to be protected by magic." "Oh," Ron said, looking more composed now that he knew it wasn't gold. He examined the silver dial adorned with crystal-like decorations. "A gift, but Professor Blaine— Oh, I see, it's about that time." Ron recalled that Professor Blaine had forgotten to give Harry a gift and blinked, looking at Harry in confusion. "But why a watch? I thought he'd give you something related to Quidditch." "We were just discussing that," Harry said. "Hermione thinks maybe Professor Blaine wants to use this watch to remind me to value time." Ron burst out laughing, but Hermione's annoyed glare made him quickly stifle his laughter. After a moment of thought, his expression grew more serious. Generally speaking, when a young wizard comes of age, their parents or elders give them a watch, and this watch accompanies them throughout their life, Ron explained. Seeing the confusion on both Hermione's and Harry's faces, he shrugged and added, "It's an ancient tradition in the wizarding world. When Bill and Charlie came of age, their parents gave them watches. Percy got one too, but he rarely wears it. Maybe he doesn't like it much." Harry was taken aback, unsure of what to say. "For you," Ron continued thoughtfully, resting his chin on his hand, "perhaps Sirius would have been more appropriate to give you one. You know what I mean. After all, he is your godfather." Hermione hesitated for a moment but remained silent. If such a tradition existed in the wizarding world, Ron's words made sense. Harry quietly took the watch back from Hermione's hand. After a moment of contemplation, he fastened it around his wrist. In the gentle candlelight, the golden glow from the watch's case exuded a somewhat mysterious aura. Harry frowned. "Is it too ostentatious?" "No," Hermione said, raising her eyebrows. "It's very nice, and it suits you well." Harry grinned, finally allowing a happy smile to spread across his face. End of this chapter. Chapter 385. In the days following the acquisition of the watch, Harry found himself in a persistent state of distraction. His sharp intuition suggested that Professor Blaine's gift might hold a significance beyond the traditional customs of the magical world, as Ron had mentioned. Typically, such gifts were bestowed by parents, elders, or guardians, and Professor Blaine did not fit any of these roles. While it was true that Professor Blaine had always shown a particular care for him, it never crossed certain boundaries. For instance, unlike Sirius, who would confront Snape directly and even duel him in the castle to protect Harry, Professor Blaine maintained a cordial relationship with Snape, perhaps the best among the staff. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had frequent interactions with Professor Blaine, more so than with any other professor. Yet, Professor Blaine seemed to pay more attention to Harry than to his friends. This wasn't due to Harry's fame as the boy who lived, but perhaps, Harry speculated, because they shared the bond of being orphans. This emotional connection might have created a resonance between them. However, Harry felt there was more to it, and this thought kept him preoccupied, trying to discern any peculiarities about the watch. Whenever he had a moment to spare, his gaze would drift to his left wrist, and he would absent-mindedly fiddle with the watch's dial, as if entranced. Even during classes, he found it difficult to focus, leading to a series of mishaps. In Professor Flitwick's class, while practicing the happy charm with Ron, Harry's attention was diverted by the light reflecting off the watch's crystal-clear dial, causing his wrist to veer off course. "Oh, I'm fine, really, I'm sure," Ron assured Professor Flitwick with a grin, despite being knocked down, and the incident concluded with Harry losing 5 points for Gryffindor. In Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration class, they were learning to transform a teacup into a turtle. Harry, distracted, flicked his wand carelessly, resulting in the teapot in front of him exploding with a loud bang, startling the young wizards at nearby tables. "Seriously, Potter," Professor McGonagall exclaimed, adjusting her square spectacles as she strode over to Harry. "When did you start emulating Mr. Finnegan's antics, Mr. Potter?" Another 5 points were deducted from Gryffindor. "Please, Harry," Hermione implored on Thursday afternoon as they made their way to the potions basement. "Stop worrying about why Professor Blaine gave you the watch. If Professor Snape catches you, he won't just deduct 5 points. Harry acknowledged Hermione's advice, realizing he needed to let the matter rest. However, avoiding mishaps in potions class didn't guarantee that trouble wouldn't find him. "Professor Snape," Harry was diligently following the instructions for brewing the intoxication potion when Malfoy suddenly raised his hand from across the room. Harry glanced over to see Malfoy smirking at him. "What's wrong, Draco?" Snape inquired lazily from his vantage point, surveying the dimly lit basement. "Potter is trying to sabotage my potion, Professor," Malfoy accused, "using that fake gold watch to reflect sunlight into my eyes and distract me." "That's nonsense," Harry retorted angrily, pointing to the tightly drawn curtains. "There's no sunlight in here at all." "Oh, indeed," Snape drawled, approaching with a greasy smile, his gaze settling on Harry's gold watch. A predatory glint flickered in his dark eyes, unnoticed by anyone else. "The famous Mr. Savior has acquired a new trinket to draw attention?" Snape cast a disdainful glance at the thick potion simmering in Harry's cauldron. "Before you explain your deplorable behavior, can you at least tell me what's in your cauldron, Mr. Potter?" "Vomit?" Harry didn't bother to refute Snape's words. His experiences over the past 2 years had taught him that arguing with Snape only led to more humiliation and harsher punishments. It had been a while since Sirius had clashed with Snape in potions like this. Snape swung his wand violently, and the potion Harry had painstakingly brewed for an hour vanished in an instant. Harry glared at Snape, his face livid, but all he received was a dismissive remark. "A pile of rubbish. 0 points, Potter. You need to submit a separate 15-inch paper on the properties of ecstasy potions before the next class." Hermione was trying to catch Harry's eye, and Ron was nudging his ankle under the table, but Harry couldn't stand Malfoy's smug expression. "I didn't stab Malfoy in the eye, Professor Snape," he protested. 10 points, Potter," Snape said coldly. "This is your punishment for lying." Harry's anger was about to boil over. Blue veins stood out on the back of his hand as he struggled to control the urge to upend the hot cauldron over Snape's head. Snape, however, wasn't finished. He leaned in close until Harry could smell the complex mixture of scents on him. Perhaps you think you can disrespect a professor because you have a murderer backing you, Potter. But if I catch you flaunting your absurdity in this classroom again— Sirius is not a murderer. He's been proven innocent, Harry shouted, standing up abruptly and meeting Snape's gaze head-on, ignoring Ron's attempts to pull him back. Snape's eyes gleamed with a frightening intensity, and he was about to retort when Hermione spoke up suddenly. "Professor Snape!" Hermione's voice trembled as she summoned all her courage to interrupt. "Harry, this watch was given to him by Professor Blaine as a reward. Last year, it was Harry who discovered the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets." At that moment, Harry noticed the cold light in Snape's eyes flicker and fade, catching him off guard. It was only for a brief moment, though, before Snape straightened up and turned away, leaving the room expressionless. The atmosphere in the potions classroom remained tense. Neville made a mistake with the scurvy dose, causing his cauldron to erupt like a volcano, affecting nearly half the students. Surprisingly, Malfoy didn't laugh at Neville this time. He seemed to sense that Snape was in an unusual mood. Normally, Neville would have been cleaning up slug mucus and frog brains until the end of the semester, but Snape merely waved his wand to clear the mess. "You have to admit, Harry," Ron began as the bell rang, signaling the end of class. Harry didn't waste a second, grabbing his school bag and storming out of the basement with a furious expression. Ron and Hermione hurried to catch up with him. "If it wasn't for you, Hermione," Ron said confidently, "Harry and Neville would probably be soaking in Snape's potion ingredients right now." "Professor Blaine's name made a difference," Hermione replied, watching Harry's profile intently. "Snape let it go for Professor Blaine's sake. I know you want to defend Sirius, but Harry, you shouldn't yell at a professor." "Who are you mad at, Harry?" Sirius asked, descending the steps opposite the foyer. He smiled and waved goodbye to a group of sixth-year Ravenclaw students before approaching the trio. As he drew near, he could sense the tension in the air. The scent of Harry and his companions reached Sirius, and he noticed the three of them standing at the basement exit. Sirius's face turned pale. "Why is that snot-nosed man bothering you again?" End of this chapter. Chapter 386, Clarification. "Oh no, Sirius. Harry's face turned uneasy. He didn't want to reveal the truth to Sirius. The reason was simple. If Sirius knew what Snape had said and done in potions class, he would undoubtedly confront Snape. While Harry would relish seeing Snape in trouble, he didn't want it to come at the cost of Sirius being reprimanded by Professor Dumbledore. "It's just that something happened with the potion Neville brewed," Harry explained, showing Sirius the red mark on his arm from the splashed potion. "I lost my temper with Neville." Sirius eyed Hermione and Ron suspiciously, but the two avoided his gaze. "All right, I'll go find Snape and get to the bottom of this," Sirius said. He wasn't foolish. He could see through the situation and likely guessed why Harry was lying to him. Though Sirius appeared calm, Harry noticed the veins bulging on the back of his hand. Anxiously, Harry grabbed Sirius's wrist and pleaded, "No, Sirius, it's no big deal. I'm used to it." "Used to it?" Harry's calm words only infuriated Sirius further. He slapped Harry's arm away and strode towards the basement. His terrifying expression startled Neville and the others emerging from the dark underground passage, causing them to lean against the wall, not daring to obstruct Sirius's path. "I'm not used to watching my godson being bullied by a snot-nosed brat. I'm going to stop him. You guys find someone who can solve this problem." Harry, finally realizing the gravity of the situation, shouted as he turned back towards the underground corridor. "Fix it," Hermione urged. "But, oh, Professor Dumbledore isn't at school these days." "Are you out of your mind?" Ron exclaimed, grabbing Hermione's wrist and dragging her towards the marble stairs. "Who else can stop him except Professor Blaine?" Sirius's mission was doomed from the start because the person he intended to confront had already arrived in Atticus Blaine's office via the fireplace. To be honest, although the two shared an unusual relationship and were now colleagues, Snape seldom visited Atticus. However, when Atticus had free time, he enjoyed dropping by Snape's office and occasionally visiting the old professor's storage room. The hot red light from the embers in the fireplace suddenly caught Atticus's attention as he pondered over something at his desk. Then, Snape emerged from a dazzling green fire tornado. Among the Hogwarts staff, Atticus's office was the most modest, and he was the only one who kept a sleeping bed there. After glancing around to ensure there were no other visitors, Snape looked at the camp bed by the window in the corner and remarked flatly, "Why don't you find yourself a proper room to sleep in?" "You know I don't care about that," Atticus replied casually, then returned to his work. "What are you doing?" Snape inquired, approaching Atticus's desk and peering at the aged manuscripts scattered across it. Atticus seemed to be calculating something. The parchment was filled with obscure formulas and spell configurations, so complex that even with Snape's magical expertise, he could only comprehend a small portion. A wizard's research is a very private and valuable endeavor, but Atticus didn't mind Snape observing his work. His thoughts were absorbed in his research. An ancient method of meditation that can enhance the perception of magical changes in the surrounding environment, but the entry threshold is very high. In my opinion, only Luna Lovegood at Hogwarts has the talent to master it. I'm trying to simplify it. Luna Lovegood? Snape frowned, and Atticus Blaine quickly identified the person he had in mind. That eccentric second-year girl from Phileas Yard? She struggled in potions and was easily distracted in class. I can't imagine her possessing the kind of talent you're describing. Atticus had practically watched this young man grow up, witnessing a magical talent unlike any he had ever encountered. Recognizing this, Snape couldn't help but feel a twinge of curiosity. This young girl is indeed very talented, but her abilities haven't been properly nurtured. She lacks a true understanding of her own potential, Atticus explained. But enough about that. What brings you here? Research demanded an uninterrupted environment, and Professor Snape, who rarely visited, certainly wasn't there for idle chatter. Atticus placed his quill back into the ink bottle and rubbed the space between his brows. He gestured for Professor Snape to sit while he prepared some tea at the mantelpiece. There was no need to hide anything between them. Snape sat on the sofa, his expression stern, and asked directly, "Did you give Potter that watch?" Atticus's movements froze. He squinted at Snape, his mind racing. Had Snape noticed something unusual about the watch? Theoretically, it was impossible. The magic and alchemy techniques Atticus used to conceal the watch's true function were intricate, with numerous interlocking magical protections. Dumbledore might sense something amiss, but even he couldn't dismantle the disguises without destroying the watch entirely. Could Dumbledore have instructed Snape privately? Given the headmaster's attention to Harry, it was likely he had noticed the watch. Atticus had initially planned to address Dumbledore's concerns when asked. Perhaps Dumbledore anticipated this and sent Snape, who was closer to Atticus, to inquire directly. But wasn't Dumbledore on a business trip? Indeed, I gave it to thank Harry, Ron, and Hermione for their help in finding the Chamber of Secrets. Is there a problem? Atticus asked, handing Snape a steaming cup of tea with an air of nonchalance. Though Snape was trustworthy, the situation was complex, and Atticus needed clarity. "I'm just here to confirm," Snape replied expressionlessly. "You might not be aware, Atticus, but Potter and his two inseparable friends have a penchant for theft. I have clear evidence linking them to the disappearance of some valuable materials from my private storage last year." This blatant lie was an obvious attempt to divert attention, and Atticus saw through it immediately. At that moment, the recently extinguished fireplace flared to life again. As Atticus turned, a silver phoenix, no larger than a swallow, emerged from the swirling flames, hovering midair. "Oh, Severus, you're here too!" Dumbledore's familiar voice sounded surprised. "I have something important to discuss with you, Atticus, but since you have company, I can reschedule." Snape made to leave, but Atticus stopped him. "Stay, Professor. If any trouble arises, I might need your help to make a quick escape." Snape's mouth twitched slightly, and Dumbledore's Phoenix Patronus flashed a look of helplessness before dissipating like a sand painting. About 10 minutes later, Dumbledore stepped out of the fireplace, wearing a purple traveling cloak. He seemed to have just returned to Hogwarts, arriving at Atticus's office before taking a moment to rest. "Please, sit down, Headmaster," Atticus directed, gesturing to a chair. Atticus Blaine settled onto the sofa as he watched Professor Snape approach the fireplace. Snape picked up a pot, shook it vigorously, and poured out some tea stems and powder. "What's the matter, Severus?" Dumbledore inquired, noticing the somber expression on Snape's face. He blinked curiously and added, "If my unexpected visit has interrupted your pleasant conversation with Atticus, I can always come back another time." A hint of sarcasm played at the corners of Snape's mouth. He snorted and sneered, but remained silent. "No need for that," Atticus interjected, approaching with a cup of tea that had a thin layer of ground leaves floating on top. He smiled and explained, "A few days ago, I gave Potter a watch to thank him for his help in finding the Chamber of Secrets last year." Professor Snape was curious about it. Due to some unpleasant past events, he mistakenly thought Potter had stolen it from me. Fortunately, we've cleared up the misunderstanding. End of this chapter. Chapter 387, Rejected Request. "A watch?" Dumbledore asked, his eyebrows raised in surprise. He seemed genuinely intrigued and inquired with enthusiasm, "What does it look like?" Atticus Blaine replied, "It's a watch crafted from magical metal. It doesn't possess any extraordinary abilities, but its main feature is its ability to measure real-time accurately and its durability." He reassured himself, dispelling any doubts about why Dumbledore had sent Snape to him. The three wizards in the office knew each other well, understanding the subtleties of their interactions. Dumbledore was aware that the watch Atticus had given Harry was likely not a conventional timepiece, but he chose not to press the matter, respecting the unspoken understanding between them. "Now, Headmaster, regarding what you just mentioned." Atticus paused, glancing towards the door. At the same moment, Dumbledore's beard twitched, and a smile played at the corners of his eyes. "You've been quite busy here, Atticus." "Unfortunate events tend to cluster together," Atticus replied, shaking his head. "Professor Blaine, Sirius is looking for him. Ahem." Hermione and Ron burst into the office, their voices urgent. However, upon seeing Professor Dumbledore seated comfortably on the sofa, a smile on his face, Hermione blushed, her fists clenching nervously. Ron, too, was rendered speechless, bright like a gourd with its mouth sawed shut. Professor Dumbledore seemed unperturbed. Meanwhile, Professor Snape, sitting stiffly, eyed them suspiciously. Hermione and Ron's faces turned from red to white, clearly at a loss. It was a truly suffocating situation. They had come to seek Professor Blaine's help, hoping he could prevent Sirius from confronting Snape. Yet, to their dismay, one of the conflicting parties was already present. What were they to do? "They're here for you, Atticus," Dumbledore remarked, his slender fingers interlaced. He leaned back on the sofa, feigning interest in the sunset that painted half the sky red outside the window, as if he had no intention of intervening. Atticus glanced at Snape, whose expression had darkened, then at the two young wizards who seemed petrified. A faint smile tugged at his lips as he formed a hypothesis. Drawing his wand, which emitted a soft glow, he traced ripples in the air, conjuring a peculiar snake with one black and one white wing. It hovered solidly in the air. Hermione noticed a deeper purple light flash in Professor Blaine's lavender eyes for a brief moment. The same purple light flickered across the room, and then Professor Blaine's Patronus darted through the wall like a bolt of lightning, vanishing from sight. "Don't worry," Atticus reassured them, crossing his fingers over his knee. "I'll have Sirius come to me." Watching Hermione and Ron retreat with even more flustered steps than when they had entered, Atticus smiled and shook his head. "I warned you, Severus," Dumbledore said, withdrawing his gaze and addressing Snape with a hint of helplessness. "What you see is only what you want to see. Some past events have clouded your judgment, but if you let go of your prejudices, you'll find he's a likable child." Snape clearly disagreed with Dumbledore's assessment of Harry. He snorted derisively and replied dryly, "You see only what you wish to see. Wise words, Headmaster Dumbledore, and they apply to you as well." Sirius, having vacated the basement, soon appeared on the third floor. Atticus had anticipated an angry entrance, perhaps even with a drawn wand, ready for confrontation. Yet, to his surprise, Sirius entered with a calm demeanor, though his gaze at Snape was filled with undisguised animosity. "I am here," Sirius acknowledged, nodding at Dumbledore and Atticus. The air was thick with tension. And Atticus Blaine knew better than to let the two adversaries sit too close to each other. He gestured for the chair behind his desk to float over to Sirius, indicating for him to take a seat. Atticus exchanged a meaningful glance with Dumbledore before speaking in a calm yet commanding voice. "I hope we can reach some consensus here today," Atticus began, his tone both authoritative and compelling. "I understand that you despise each other and have no intention of reconciling. I'm not an idealist, nor do I aim to change your views. However, this is Hogwarts, home to hundreds of young wizards eager to learn. You must realize that any conflict within the castle could impact these underage students." Dumbledore nodded in agreement, his voice firm as he added, "What Atticus has said reflects my own thoughts. I hope you both understand the responsibilities that come with being a professor." Their words seemed to have some effect. Sirius and Snape, who had been glaring daggers at each other, reluctantly shifted their gazes to Atticus, though Sirius soon turned back to Snape with a defiant look before addressing Dumbledore. "I've made a decision, Headmaster Dumbledore," Sirius announced, his voice resolute. "I mentioned it to Atticus earlier, but he insisted you should know as well." "Oh, and what decision is that?" Dumbledore inquired, his tone serious. "By this summer vacation, I intend to take Harry away from his aunt and uncle's house. I've spoken to Harry, and he's eager to leave," Sirius declared. Snape's eyebrows shot up, and though his lips moved as if to speak, he remained silent, his face paling. The office fell into a heavy silence, which in itself seemed to convey an unspoken answer. Snape's expression shifted subtly, a sardonic smile playing on his lips, while Sirius, confident that Dumbledore would not object, suddenly looked grim. "I'm sorry, Sirius," Dumbledore finally said, his eyes meeting Sirius's with a calm intensity. "I cannot agree to your request." "I'm Harry's godfather," Sirius exclaimed, rising abruptly and glaring at Dumbledore. "Harry wants to live with me, and you might not be aware, but his Muggle relatives have been mistreating him. Harry told me they made him live in a cupboard under the stairs before he came to Hogwarts." Sirius's anger grew as he recounted Harry's experiences with the Dursleys. Snape's expression shifted again, a mix of surprise and an unfamiliar anger bubbling within him. Petunia Evans, that absurd woman, dared to. "In fact," Sirius continued, his voice rising with indignation, but Dumbledore interrupted, his voice weary. "I am likely more informed about Harry's life with his aunt than you realize, Sirius," Dumbledore said. Sirius fell silent, staring at Dumbledore with the same incredulity mirrored in Snape's eyes. "Why?" Sirius demanded coldly. "If you know, why haven't you rescued Harry from that dreadful Muggle couple? Why do you stand by and watch, Dumbledore? If not for James and Lily, if not for Harry, we might still be under Voldemort's shadow." Atticus suspected Sirius wanted to accuse Dumbledore of betrayal, but out of the respect he still held for the headmaster, he restrained himself. Yet, seeing the ashen faces of Sirius and Snape, Atticus knew Dumbledore needed to provide some substantial explanation. Dumbledore, aware of the gravity of the situation, seemed to age in those few moments, the lines on his forehead deepening as he prepared to respond. After a few tense seconds of silence, Atticus Blaine finally spoke. "Please, sit down, Sirius. And Severus, I promise to provide you with a reasonable explanation." End of this chapter. Chapter 388, A New Errand. This might be the first time Dumbledore realized that his authority was faltering at Hogwarts. Sirius stood there, emanating a cold aura, while Snape glared at him with sullen eyes. "I hope to hear reasons that can address my doubts, rather than the usual high-sounding words," Snape demanded. At this moment, Atticus Blaine felt a twinge of sympathy for Dumbledore. These two middle-aged men, usually at odds, had united for the first time to demand an explanation from him. "Well, if you're willing to listen, I must insist that what I share remains strictly confidential. It must not be disclosed to anyone, especially not to the person involved. At least for now," Dumbledore sighed. "First, I trust you haven't forgotten the dreadful night 12 years ago. Voldemort went to Godric's Hollow and found the Potter family. James and Lily died, and little Harry survived, frustrating Voldemort and becoming famous overnight." At this, both Sirius and Snape inhaled sharply, their lips pursed tightly with worry. Atticus sipped his tea, maintaining his composure as a listener. Some of the information was familiar to him, while other details were new revelations. Dumbledore spoke in a low, somber tone. When he mentioned that Lily Evans had created a powerful protective magic in Harry's blood at the cost of her life, Snape appeared as if struck by lightning. Atticus could sense the intense emotions emanating from Snape's dark eyes, emotions that even occlumency couldn't fully conceal. Atticus understood that Snape's pain stemmed not only from the loss of his beloved, but also from the fact that the child Lily Evans sacrificed herself to protect was the son of his lifelong rival James Potter. This underscored Lily's deep love for James. So, it wasn't Harry but Lily. Sirius murmured absently, it was Lily's magic that defeated Voldemort. It was Lily Potter's unreserved, pure love for her son Harry that defeated Voldemort, Dumbledore corrected, though he too was enveloped in sadness. Love is a formidable power, one that Voldemort will never comprehend. Sirius seemed deeply affected. He sat down slowly, covering his face with his hands, his shoulders trembling with remorse. He couldn't forget that his actions had led to Lily's sacrifice, and he blamed himself. While Sirius's remorse was expected, Atticus was surprised by Snape's display of regret. Could Snape have also played a role in the Potters' deaths? But Voldemort is finished, isn't he, Dumbledore? The protective magic you cast on Harry. Sirius eventually spoke, his voice hoarse, like a parched traveler in the desert. Harry doesn't need the blood protection from the Muggle couple anymore. He can... Do you truly believe Voldemort is gone for good? Dumbledore's voice suddenly hardened, silencing Sirius once more. I have a question, academically speaking, Headmaster Dumbledore, Atticus interjected thoughtfully. If I were to kill the Dursleys, would that render the protective magic you cast on Harry ineffective? Sirius and Snape glared at Atticus angrily, but Dumbledore understood that Atticus's inquiry was purely academic. After a brief pause, Dumbledore replied, Yes, but that is merely an additional layer of protection atop Lily's magic. Even if my magic fails, the magic in Harry's blood will persist, and Voldemort will still be unable to harm him, harming Harry. Where are his followers? Atticus Blaine inquired. This kind of protection exists only between Harry and Voldemort, but I'm not particularly worried about that possibility, Atticus. If you know Tom as I do, you'll understand that to restore his prestige, he must act himself. If I remember correctly, that contract-like magic has a time limit. Until adulthood, Dumbledore replied, gazing deeply into Atticus's eyes. His tone suddenly became erratic. Of course, there needs to be foolproof measures, Atticus. You know the connection between Harry and Tom, so we may need new precautions. I understand what you mean, Dumbledore, Atticus frowned, but it doesn't have tealing or be so troublesome. I mean, Voldemort can't oppose us all at once. Mid-sentence, Atticus realized something and changed the subject, hesitating. Forget it. I won't interfere with your plan. The future is uncertain. Both Sirius and Snape sensed that Dumbledore and Atticus were discussing something crucial related to protecting Harry, but they couldn't grasp the details. It was clear that the two riddlers in front of them weren't going to explain their discussion. When Sirius and Snape left, they both appeared distraught. Then, Headmaster Dumbledore, Atticus asked after their previous discussion, you mentioned something important you needed to talk to me about. What is it? It's actually like this. Dumbledore's tone became cheerful again. This matter is still top secret, and only those involved are allowed to know. Most of my energy has been consumed by this. An old event that hasn't been held for many years will be revived next school year. An ancient game? Atticus frowned. Hearing the name of the event from Dumbledore's mouth, even the prepared Atticus couldn't help but show a bit of surprise. The Triwizard Tournament? You mean the event that was banned for centuries due to its high casualty rate? That's the one, Dumbledore said with a smile. There have been several attempts over the centuries to bring back the tournament, each time successfully. However, we at the Department of International Magical Cooperation and Magical Sports at the Ministry of Magic believe the time is ripe for another attempt. The Ministry has made a concrete move, and we've reached a consensus with two other great magic schools. You must know, Beauxbatons and Durmstrang. The International Federation of Wizards has also secretly passed a resolution. Amazing, Atticus remarked, clicking his tongue in surprise. He hadn't expected that this ancient event, which had become part of magical history, would have the possibility of being revived one day. But what do I need to do? Oh, although we've reached a basic consensus, there are still many issues, Dumbledore said, raising his eyebrows helplessly. First of all, The biggest disagreement we face is which magic school will host the event. I'm sure I have the virtues of modesty and courtesy, Atticus, but if I don't support Hogwarts in this matter, the school board might try to oust me again. Dumbledore took a sip of tea, not minding the foam in his mouth. He thought for a moment, then continued speaking to Atticus. For a while, the principals of the other two schools and I, were at the Federation, each stating our strengths. Oh, I haven't encountered such a heated debate in many years. For an old man of my age, it's quite a burden. The reasons for self-recommendation provided by the three schools were so compelling that the International Federation of Wizards had no choice. In the end, considering the danger of the tournament, we had to make a decision. In order to ensure the safety of every young wizard participating in the event, the Federation required each of the three schools to submit a safety plan. Noticing Atticus Blaine's stunned expression, Dumbledore smiled warmly and said, "You are the head of the Student Safety Office at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, aren't you, Atticus? I believe it's up to you to persuade those stubborn folks with your meticulously prepared plan." End of this chapter. Chapter 389. Dumbledore had indeed found him a challenging job. After a hurried departure, eager to return to his private quarters for a much-needed bath, Dumbledore left Atticus Blaine alone in the office, contemplating the headmaster's recent instructions. The task at hand was far from simple. The specific events of the Triwizard Tournament were top secret, and the organizing committee had yet to finalize the competition's challenges. Without prior knowledge of these events, devising a comprehensive safety plan to protect the young wizards seemed daunting. Yet Atticus had no choice in the matter. As Dumbledore had pointed out, as the headmaster, he was obligated to secure this honor for the school. Atticus, a Hogwarts alumnus and a key figure in security, was equally bound to give his utmost effort. If Hogwarts were to lose the privilege of hosting due to inadequate security measures, the backlash from the British wizarding community would be severe. Moreover, Dumbledore had emphasized the urgency of preparing a safety plan, as it required approval from the Ministry of Magic, specifically the Department of International Magical Cooperation and the Department of Magical Games and Sports. Barty Crouch was a key figure in this process. As Atticus paced the room, he couldn't help but frown at the thought of Crouch. Although they had no personal animosity, Atticus's support for Amelia placed them on opposing sides politically. Barty Crouch had been fortunate. Initially, his career seemed doomed due to the wrongful imprisonment of Sirius Black. Fudge had intended to use this incident to oust Crouch from the Wizengamot. However, Crouch's fervent declarations during the trial and the mysterious death of Peter Pettigrew unexpectedly bolstered his reputation among those with a strong sense of justice. Crouch retained his position, and if the Triwizard Tournament succeeded with Hogwarts as the host, it would be another feather in his cap, potentially paving his way to the Minister of Magic's office. This prospect was not in Atticus's best interest. The thought of undermining Crouch's ambitions briefly crossed his mind, but he quickly dismissed it. He couldn't compromise his principles and integrity for political gain. Dumbledore's unexpected assignment had disrupted many of Atticus's plans. His cherished physical education initiative had just reached a critical phase, and abandoning it now would render previous efforts futile. Feeling a sense of gloom, Atticus approached the window, inhaling the cooling evening air and massaging his temples. He watched the playground below, where young wizards enjoyed themselves on the lawn. On the Quidditch field, several Hufflepuff students diligently completed their running exercises. Suddenly, Atticus chuckled softly, turned away from the window, and walked back into the room, ready to tackle the challenges ahead. Atticus Blaine moved towards the door, preparing to go downstairs for dinner. He now understood a bit of Professor McGonagall's frustration, what it felt like to work under a hands-off leader. Harry and his friends dared not get too close. They hid at the corner of the third-floor stairs, watching with concern as Sirius strode into Professor Blaine's office. His figure was visible to them all. Earlier, Sirius had rushed to confront Snape on Harry's behalf. Although he assured Harry that he merely wanted to discuss Snape's teaching attitude, after knocking several times without a response from Snape's office, Sirius couldn't resist breaking open the door in a rather impolite manner. Inside, they saw miraculous plant and animal specimens floating in colorful solutions against the wall. Both Harry and Sirius frowned, sharing the same expression of disgust. The private storage room further inside was empty. Just as they began to suspect that Blaise Zabini had misled them, Professor Blaine's Patronus emerged through the wall, positioning itself between them. Professor Snape and Professor Dumbledore. Sirius and Harry were rushing to the third floor when they encountered Hermione and Ron, who were hurrying to find them. Hermione, out of breath, said, "They're both in Professor Blaine's office." Interesting, Sirius sneered at Hermione's reminder. Could it be that the snot-nosed villain complained first? It doesn't seem like it, Sirius, Ron stammered, still unaccustomed to addressing Sirius by name in front of a professor. Professor Dumbledore, at least, seems to be in a good mood. He doesn't look angry. I'm fine, Sirius, really, Harry insisted. Even if it was a dragon's lair or a tiger's den, Sirius wasn't afraid. He intended to confront Snape alone, but Harry held his arm tightly, looking at him with determination. You can't fight Snape in front of Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine. Please, Sirius, don't tell him the truth. Harry would rather endure Snape's difficulties 100 times than see Sirius expelled from Hogwarts by Dumbledore for fighting Snape again. Perhaps it was the sincerity in Harry's eyes that calmed Sirius. After giving Harry a reassuring smile, he freed himself from Harry's grip and strode towards Professor Blaine's office. Waiting was always the hardest part. Harry, Hermione, and Ron stayed at the corner of the stairs, not daring to get too close. With the two most powerful wizards in the world in that office, they didn't expect Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine to overlook their eavesdropping, but they couldn't help but strain their ears. The little wizards passing by gave them strange looks, but Harry was too worried about Sirius's fate to care. Don't worry, Harry, Hermione said gently, noticing Harry's clenched fists. She patted his shoulder reassuringly. Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine won't be unfair. They know Sirius just wants to help you overcome Professor Snape's prejudice. He doesn't want to cause trouble. To be honest, Hermione's statement wasn't entirely objective. While Sirius did want to help Harry, it was also true that he personally disliked Snape. Minutes felt like hours, but finally there was movement from the office. As soon as the door hinge squeaked, Harry rushed forward, but after just 2 steps, his body... Atticus Blaine froze, his expression mirroring the shock he felt. The first person to emerge was Snape, looking more distressed than Atticus had ever seen him. Snape's usual brisk, wind-like stride was now unsteady, as if he had suffered a significant blow. Could Snape have been the one expelled? The thought crossed Atticus's mind, but the pained expression on Sirius's face, who followed closely behind, suggested otherwise. Ignoring Snape's lingering gaze as he passed by, Atticus hurried over to Sirius, who appeared somewhat weakened. "What's the matter, Sirius?" Atticus asked, his voice laced with concern. He cast a quick glance at Snape, who was already descending the stairs, before turning his full attention back to Sirius. You didn't do anything, did you? End of this chapter. Chapter 390. Outcomes of Training. Harry never expected things to deteriorate so quickly. Just last Saturday at the Three Broomsticks, Sirius had promised to pick him up from the Dursleys for the summer holidays. Harry, who had longed to escape the Dursleys for years, was thrilled at the prospect. This dream was finally about to come true. However, only a few days later, Sirius changed his mind. After emerging from Professor Blaine's office, Sirius informed Harry of his new decision. It would be better for Harry to stay with the Dursleys, his only living relatives by blood. To improve Harry's situation, Sirius offered to speak with the Dursleys. Harry couldn't help but suspect that Sirius's change of heart was influenced by Professor Blaine and Professor Dumbledore. When Sirius had mentioned his plan at the Three Broomsticks, Professor Blaine had subtly expressed his disapproval. Harry found it absurd that others were making decisions for him. For several days, he was visibly upset during Professor Blaine's physical education class, and even considered skipping it altogether. "I advise you to stay calm, Harry," Hermione said sensibly. Since she had stopped using the time turner, her schedule had become more manageable, though she still attended more classes than most. To save time, she had taken to walking while reading and completing simple homework. On the evening of their physical education class, several Gryffindors headed to the armor-filled classroom together. When Harry vented his frustrations, Hermione briefly looked up from 1,000 magical herbs and fungi and said, "Think of Pansy Parkinson in Slytherin." Pansy Parkinson was an irritating girl from Slytherin. Few could associate with Malfoy without being equally annoying. Generally, Slytherin students supported Professor Blaine, seeing him as one of their own. His rising fame over the past 2 years had made Slytherin students unusually proud. Harry had heard from Hufflepuff's Justin Finch-Fletchley that Slytherin House eagerly anticipated Dumbledore's retirement, believing Professor Blaine would be the next headmaster of Hogwarts. Despite Professor Blaine's Slytherin roots, Harry didn't mind the idea of him becoming headmaster if Dumbledore ever stepped down. However, the thought of the Slytherin student's current ambitions disgusted him. Pansy Parkinson, unable to endure the rigorous training, dared to skip class, even after Professor Blaine had made it clear that the time for leniency had passed. Professor Blaine, intolerant of such defiance, entered the Slytherin common room after their training session and instructed the female prefect to bring Pansy out of the dormitory. He then trained her alone for 2 hours. Rumor had it that Pansy spent the night in the school hospital. Reflecting on her fate, Harry shivered, dispelling any rebellious thoughts. Professor Blaine had introduced new requirements for his physical education class. He recorded the distance each student could advance under the attack of the bludger and demanded improvement with each session, even if only by a foot. Failure to improve meant continued practice without the chance to return to the dormitory for sleep. Harry's experience in these classes was the potions class was another significant reason for Harry's foul mood. He wasn't entirely sure what had transpired in Professor Atticus Blaine's office that day, but it was clear that Snape was seeking revenge. Snape took it a step further by mocking Harry in class, awarding him 0 marks for his classwork. Consequently, Harry's potions essay had to be at least 1/3 longer than those of his fellow students. This time, it wasn't Sirius who came to Harry's aid, but Professor McGonagall. She couldn't stand the rapid depletion of Gryffindor's points in the hourglass any longer. The first heavy rain of the year, accompanied by thunderstorms, arrived over the weekend, signaling the imminent arrival of summer. Ron and Seamus spent half the afternoon playing gobstones in the common room. Harry watched the game but refrained from participating, as the punishment for losing, a spray of foul-smelling liquid, was not appealing. After 2 games, they switched to wizard chess, which piqued Harry's interest. However, when it came to wizard chess, neither Harry nor Seamus could match Ron's skill. Under the rule of loser rotates, Ron remained undefeated, while Harry and Seamus took turns challenging him. After another defeat by Ron's knight, Harry shrugged it off and glanced out the window, noticing the sky had grown even gloomier. "Oh, I need to run," Harry exclaimed, realizing it was nearly dinner time. He stood up in a hurry. Many young wizards scheduled their mandatory half-hour run, as required by Professor Blaine, between the end of classes and dinner. This timing was ideal, as it didn't interfere with other activities throughout the day. "Good luck, Harry," Seamus said sympathetically, glancing up from the chessboard at the rain-soaked world outside. Professor Blaine hadn't mentioned any exceptions for running in inclement weather. Harry looked around. Neville was absent from the lounge, Fred and George had disappeared, and Ginny and Hermione were huddled in a corner, deep in conversation. "What are you talking about?" Harry asked as he approached them. "Penelope Clearwater," Hermione replied, slightly annoyed. "Luna told me she's often seen Penelope looking lost in thought in the common room lately." "So what?" Harry asked, not quite grasping Hermione's point. "So?" Hermione's irritation grew. "I'm telling Ginny about this, hoping she can talk to Percy. I don't know what issues they have, but they've always been close, haven't they?" Though Harry thought Hermione was meddling, he wisely kept his thoughts to himself. He sensed that Hermione believed all boys were as insensitive as Percy. Together, they left the lounge, heading to the Quidditch pitch for their run. With Hermione's presence, Harry felt reassured, knowing she had a repertoire of practical charms to help them navigate any awkward situations. The day's relentless rain had turned the marble foyer into a slippery hazard, resembling an ice rink. Many young wizards slipped and fell, their cries of pain echoing through the corridors. From the second floor, Harry and his friends could hear the commotion below. "This is terrible. Isn't anyone maintaining order?" Hermione muttered as they reached the second-floor platform. There, they spotted Neville standing at the castle's entrance, gazing out at the rain-drenched world. With his shoulders drooping, Hermione guessed that Neville was feeling melancholy. She pursed her lips, ready to invite him to join them. However, before she could speak, a sharp, mocking laugh interrupted her greeting. It was Peeves. The mischievous ghost suddenly appeared through the ceiling above the hall, floating at the same level as Harry and the others. Harry, Hermione, and Ginny all noticed Peeves clutching a bunch of fist-sized water balloons in his arms. They immediately realized what the prankster was planning. Peeves fixed his gaze on Neville, who was closest to the door. The muscles on his mischievous, broad face tensed, and before Harry and the others could shout a warning, Peeves hurled a water balloon with all his might, aiming for the back of Neville's head. It was peculiar. As they watched the water balloon's trajectory in midair, Harry and the others had a strange thought. Why did the balloon, thrown with such force, seem to move so slowly? Harry parted his lips, realizing that the balloon's speed wasn't actually slow. Before he could utter the first syllable, Peeves's water balloon was only 2 feet away from the back of Neville's head. Under the sympathetic gaze of those witnessing the scene, Neville suddenly moved. Harry noticed that, although Neville had turned around, a familiar look of confusion still lingered on his face. Yet, his hand had already lifted from his side, and in the nick of time, he accurately caught Peeves's water balloon. Boom! In the next second, the water balloon, thrown by Neville, brushed against Peeves's stiff cheeks, hit the ceiling of the foyer, and exploded. End of this chapter. Chapter 391, The Teaching Assistant. The rain poured heavily outside the castle, its relentless drumming a constant assault on the nerves of those within. Yet, just beyond the foyer's door, an eerie silence prevailed. Inside, Neville stood frozen, his posture reminiscent of a baseball pitcher mid-throw, as if caught in a moment of disbelief at his own actions. His once round face, now noticeably slimmer, wore a dazed expression, seemingly unaware of the feat he had just accomplished. "Oh, damn it! That was so cool!" Ginny exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with admiration. She watched Neville with keen interest, whispering to herself. Harry, standing beside her, couldn't help but feel a twinge of surprise. Ginny, his little sister, had always been his biggest admirer, a fact known to everyone. Yet today, she openly praised another boy. Harry had to admit, Neville's quick reflexes were impressive, but still, this was Neville. After 3 years of Snape's relentless criticism, Neville's clumsiness was legendary, even among students from other houses. So, what had happened to transform him into this confident, agile figure? "Neville, you rascal!" While others were still processing Neville's unexpected display of skill, Peeves was the first to react. Interpreting Neville's throw as a challenge, Peeves grew furious. He removed his hat, which jingled with bells, revealing an unusual space within, akin to a gymnasium. With hands moving in a blur, Peeves began pulling out water balloons, launching them with the rapidity of firecrackers. "Oh, help!" Neville's earlier composure vanished, replaced by panic. Like the other young wizards trapped in the hall, he scrambled to dodge Peeves' barrage of water balloons. "Ah, there he is," Ginny remarked, the stars in her eyes fading. She shrugged, a wry smile playing on her lips. "That's the Neville I know." "Harry," Hermione's voice came from the stone railing on the second floor. Her expression was serious, her eyes fixed on Neville. "Have you noticed?" "Of course," Harry replied, understanding her unspoken observation. The marble floor, slick with water, was as treacherous as ice. While others struggled to stay upright, Neville, though unsteady, never once fell. The floor was as slippery as the mucus of a giant dung beetle, and every student in physical education class had learned to avoid falling at all costs. "It's working, isn't it?" A voice from behind startled them. They turned to see Professor Atticus Blaine, who had approached unnoticed. "Oh, Professor Blaine, I'm sorry, I didn't see you there." Hermione apologized quickly. Harry, on the other hand, tensed, his face betraying a mix of emotions. Lately, he had harbored resentment towards Professor Dumbledore, and Professor Blaine for the shattered dream of leaving the Dursleys, and he was equally frustrated with Sirius for breaking his promise. "I'm here for dinner," Professor Blaine said with a warm smile. "And you?" "We were just about to finish today's running exercises before dinner," Hermione explained, gesturing towards the rain-soaked doorway. "But Peeves has blocked the exit." Professor Blaine nodded, understanding their predicament. With a flick of his wrist, he deftly caught his slipping wand, ready to assist. Atticus Blaine waved his wand lightly, and the water balloon Peeves had just launched burst into a golden flame with a loud bang, leaving it scorched. Black smoke rose from the orange bow tie perched on Peeves' nose. "Who dares?" Peeves shrieked, his eyes darting around fiercely. "Who interrupted Lord Peeves while he was punishing the disobedient little wizard?" Upon spotting Professor Blaine on the second-floor platform, his arm still raised, Peeves' expression shifted instantly from brazen to deferential. "Ah, it's the esteemed Professor Blaine!" Peeves straightened his comically short and stout body. "What are your orders?" Peeves' sudden change in demeanor amused Harry, who couldn't help but giggle. It was well known that the only entity Peeves feared at Hogwarts was the ghost of Slytherin, the blood Wyvern. Typically, Peeves was unruly, showing little respect even for Professor Dumbledore. However, since Professor Blaine had vanquished Greyback's werewolf pack, Peeves had found another figure to heed. "I have no orders, Peeves," Professor Blaine replied with a gentle smile. "I simply ask that you refrain from causing trouble." "As you command." Peeves performed a peculiar salute before slipping through the ceiling, vanishing from sight. "Well, that's sorted," Professor Blaine said cheerfully. "I'm off to dinner now. Please carry on. Oh, honestly, I'm quite famished. Some matters have been consuming my energy, and I seem to have missed lunch today." With that, Professor Blaine descended the stairs. However, midway down, he paused and turned to look at Hermione. After a moment's thought, he nodded towards her. "There's no class tonight, Miss Granger. If it's convenient, I'd like you to visit my office before 8 o'clock. Hermione opened her mouth, but before she could question why Professor Blaine had summoned her, he extended the same invitation to Neville in the hall. "And you, Mr. Longbottom, I hope you'll be there as well." "It's not special training, is it?" Neville, still drenched from the earlier incident, asked anxiously, glancing at Hermione as they descended the stairs. "Don't be silly, Neville," Ginny interjected dryly. "If it were special training, none of us would be spared." The relentless rain continued, and the Black Lake's waters had surged over the embankment, spilling onto the lawn. The thunderous roar of the waves crashing against the cliff echoed like thunder, leaving the young wizards in the castle feeling uneasy. At precisely 7:30, Hermione and Neville arrived on the third floor, where Professor Blaine's office was located. There, they encountered another student, Luna Lovegood. Luna, a second-year student, was a year below them, but thanks to the physical education class taught by Blaine, she was already familiar with several Gryffindor students. "Good evening," Luna greeted, her voice cheerful. She wore a necklace made of beer bottle caps and was the first to spot Hermione and Neville approaching from the opposite end of the corridor. "Good evening, Luna," Hermione replied, her eyes briefly lingering on Luna's peculiar necklace. Her delicate brows furrowed slightly. Hermione couldn't fathom how Professor Flitwick allowed Luna to dress so eccentrically. If Luna were in Gryffindor, Professor McGonagall would surely have something to say. However, Hermione knew the importance of respecting personal choices among friends, so she kept her thoughts to herself, though her eyes betrayed a hint of confusion. "Did Professor Blaine ask you to come too? Did he mention why?" Hermione inquired. "He didn't say," Luna replied, her silver eyes filled with curiosity, though her tone was sincere. "I suppose he might be planning to teach us the magic of repelling, the harassing gadfly." Hermione and Neville exchanged a knowing glance, choosing to remain silent. "But I think he's wasting his time," Luna said, pushing open the office door with emotion as if she were shooing away moths. "There's no trick to dealing with this creature. We just have to get used to it." The sudden downpour outside had caused the temperature to plummet, and the fireplace in the office crackled with glowing red embers. Professor Atticus Blaine sat behind his desk, resting his chin in his hands, staring at the pile of parchment before him with a pained expression. Hermione recognized this look all too well. It was the same one Harry and Ron wore when struggling to meet the required length for their History of Magic essays, or when grappling with Professor Trelawney's ominous prophecies. "Sit down," Professor Blaine said, tossing his quill into the inkwell and gesturing for them to take a seat. As Hermione approached the desk, she quickly scanned the cluttered documents. Among them, she noticed a large piece of parchment that appeared to be a bird's-eye view of the school. On top of another stack, in the upper right corner, there was a small photograph that seemed to be of Madame Pomfrey. "You must be wondering why I've called you here, so I'll get straight to the point," Professor Blaine said, waving his wand. 3 cups of steaming pumpkin juice appeared before them. Atticus rubbed his tired brow and addressed the trio. "Due to certain circumstances, I will be leaving Hogwarts for a while. I'm not sure when I'll return, but in my absence, I need to ensure that the physical education classes continue smoothly. So," he spread his hands, "I would like you to serve as teaching assistants for physical education. What do you think?" End of this chapter. Chapter 392. The reason for the choice is Professor Blaine leaving Hogwarts? Hermione blinked, but she wasn't surprised. It wasn't really a big deal. Hagrid occasionally left Hogwarts on business, and Professor Dumbledore frequently departed to attend to his own affairs. A glance at the thick stack of unopened letters in the corner of Professor Blaine's desk revealed the numerous academic conferences and high-end receptions he was invited to on a regular basis. However, the teaching assistant role was a different matter. Neville shifted uneasily in his seat, subconsciously glancing at Hermione, hoping for some guidance from the classmate he admired so much. But Hermione looked just as bewildered. If it were a subject like spells or transfiguration, Hermione felt confident and even enthusiastic, as it meant she had mastered the material. But Professor Blaine's physical education class left her with doubts. What could she possibly contribute? Luna, on the other hand, wore an expression of indifference. For her, it made no difference whether she participated or not. "Why? Not very happy?" Atticus Blaine raised an eyebrow, though his expression remained gentle. Hermione hesitated for a moment before nervously asking, "Professor Blaine, can you tell me why you chose us? I mean, we aren't the best, are we? Cedric is currently the top performer. Oh, and Harry and Malfoy are doing well too." "Winning and losing in the short term is not what I care about," Atticus replied calmly, shaking his head. "Of course, I do need to explain to you. First of all, Mr. Longbottom." Atticus turned his gaze to Neville, noticing the boy's clenched fists. His smile softened. "Don't be nervous, Mr. Longbottom. I chose you because of your outstanding talent. There are many kinds of talent, such as a bright mind, focus in learning, and a thirst for knowledge. Miss Granger, for instance, is gifted and accomplished, and Harry, who became the youngest seeker in a century, thanks to his sharp reflexes and balance. As for you, Mr. Longbottom, your talent in magic may be average, but physically, you surpass even Harry. However, certain aspects of your personality overshadow your strengths. Only when these are revealed." Neville blinked, as if he didn't quite understand. Hermione, however, grasped the meaning but didn't take it to heart. What Professor Blaine likely meant was that Neville's timid nature prevented him from showcasing his abilities, thus concealing his strengths. But so what? Many Muggle athletes are talented, yet this doesn't necessarily make them good wizards. Sensing Hermione's thoughts, Professor Blaine continued, "Godric Gryffindor, the founder of Gryffindor House, was a heroic warrior who combined ancient magic with Muggle combat skills to defeat many formidable foes of his time. Mr. Longbottom." Professor Blaine paused, addressing Neville, who looked a bit frightened. "At least in terms of combat skills, I believe you have the potential to develop in that area. Moreover, this is an opportunity for you to showcase yourself more." Professor Blaine genuinely believed Neville had the potential to follow in the footsteps of the great Gryffindor. If this statement were to spread, Neville might face ridicule, but Professor Blaine was not one to make light-hearted jokes. Hermione turned to stare at Neville's round, apprehensive face, as if seeing him for the first time in shock. "As for Miss Granger, I've already mentioned your strengths," Professor Blaine nodded at Hermione, "but I missed one point. It's challenging to adhere to rules. After I leave, it's foreseeable that some young wizards might take the opportunity to slack off or even cause trouble. I need someone who can maintain classroom discipline. For this reason, I chose you. I will grant you some authority, Professor Atticus Blaine said, addressing Hermione with a serious tone. You can deduct points from those unruly little wizards, much like a prefect, and place them in detention. Filch will assist you. Typically, after the 5th year, the school selects students with exemplary character and academic performance to become prefects, granting them certain privileges akin to those of professors. Hermione had never heard of a professor bestowing such significant authority upon a 3rd-year student. With authority comes responsibility. Hermione quickly realized that some students might try to cheat or cause trouble during training. Could she truly manage them? As she pondered this, another question surfaced in her mind. Why had Professor Blaine brought Luna here? Luna was a 2nd-year student, specially recruited into the physical education class by Professor Blaine. Ginny had received similar treatment, and her skills were indeed impressive. In the current physical education class, Ginny's performance was among the best. However, Luna's performance was far from remarkable. She ranked near the bottom. During training, Luna was easily distracted, often looking around aimlessly and becoming disoriented, eventually having to leave the field. As for Miss Lovegood, Professor Blaine hesitated, glancing at Luna, who seemed lost in thought. You still claim you can see those peculiar little creatures? They're everywhere, Luna replied, snapping back to reality. She swatted at her ears as if swarmed by buzzing flies. Hermione and Neville, familiar with Luna's eccentricities, exchanged knowing glances. Hermione quickly looked at Professor Blaine before addressing Luna sternly. Don't be silly, Luna. No one has ever heard of the harassment or the horned snorkack. I checked the library, and there's no evidence. They exist, Luna retorted, her face set with determination. She gestured animatedly in the air. Just because you can't see them doesn't mean they aren't there. There are countless eyewitness reports. As Luna argued with Hermione, Professor Blaine observed thoughtfully, his right hand behind his back, middle finger and thumb poised. Snap! The unexpected sound of his fingers snapping startled Hermione, interrupting her attempt to dissuade Luna from her beliefs. She instinctively glanced at Professor Blaine, just as a strong gust of wind swept past the window, rattling the glass. Wow! Hermione and Neville were momentarily stunned, but Luna seemed to perceive something extraordinary. She leaped onto the sofa in fright. As Hermione and Neville exchanged puzzled looks, Luna pointed a trembling finger out the window, her voice a mix of fear and excitement. Heliopa! She exclaimed, her eyes wide with wonder. A group of Heliopa just ran past. What is that? Neville asked uneasily, shrugging his shoulders. Massive flaming creatures that race across the land, incinerating everything in their path, but I didn't know they could fly, Luna declared with certainty. Hermione pursed her lips, trying to suppress a smile. Professor Blaine nodded to himself, satisfied. Luna Lovegood's keen perception of magic had reached a level where she could realize it. In all his years, she was the first student he had encountered with such sensitivity to magical power, rivaling his own. I have something here, Professor Blaine said, turning back to his desk and opening a drawer. Atticus Blaine opened the drawer and retrieved a brand new notebook. He returned to the sofa and handed it to Luna. This notebook teaches people how to see harassment, he explained. Meeting Luna's bright silver eyes, Professor Blaine smiled warmly. If you're interested, Miss Lovegood, you can study it first. End of this chapter. Chapter 393, Another Admirer. The light rain that had been gently tapping on the windows before bedtime suddenly intensified in the middle of the night. A series of thunderous booms echoed across the undulating black lake, startling the giant squid that resided within its depths. The creature, disturbed from its slumber, thrashed about, creating waves that surged over the lake's banks and flooded the courtyard lawn. Filch, the night watchman, witnessed this chaos and, feeling helpless, had no choice but to wake his superior. In the pouring rain, Atticus Blaine had to engage in a pleasant negotiation with the giant squid to prevent the early rising students from discovering that Hogwarts Castle had seemingly relocated to the water. Afterward, he spent considerable time repairing the disheveled embankment. As a result, Atticus barely slept that night. This tumultuous evening disrupted Atticus's plan to arrive at the Ministry of Magic before 8 o'clock the following morning. March and April had been particularly challenging months for the ministry's employees. First, Atticus Blaine dismantled the most notorious werewolf gang in Britain. Then, he captured Sirius Black, who had escaped from Azkaban. Finally, Peter Pettigrew, who had been awarded the Order of Merlin, First Class, was revealed to be a traitor and murderer, leading to a trial by the Wizengamot. Each of these events would have been enough to fuel discussions for a year, yet they all unfolded within a mere couple of months, causing significant upheaval for the British Ministry of Magic. Now that these crises had subsided, Rufus Scrimgeour and his team were still busy investigating who had tampered with the portkey to Azkaban, resulting in an assassination attempt on Peter. However, this matter was beyond the concern of most officials, who were eager to return to their routine, albeit hectic, work. The previous night's torrential rain had overwhelmed London's drainage system. When Atticus, looking weary, arrived in the alley where the Ministry of Magic's entrance telephone booth was located, he was surprised to find the usually deserted alley submerged in muddy water up to his ankles. "Oh, this is bad," Atticus muttered, frowning at the ocean before him. "I hope the Ministry of Magic isn't flooded." Despite the entrance phone booth's dilapidated appearance, it remained reliable. Atticus successfully entered the ministry's entrance hall, which was as bustling as ever. The heavy rain seemed to have affected the ministry slightly. As Atticus emerged from the fireplace, he noticed that many of the fireplaces around him had ceased operation, leaving the grand hall in disarray. At that moment, a middle-aged wizard with a pale face emerged from a working fireplace opposite Atticus. The wizard had prominent dark circles under his eyes, disheveled hair, and his black leather shoes were caked with mud, evidence of his recent trek through the mire. "Can you stop making a mess, Dirk?" Tycross, who was directing staff to repair the fireplaces, shouted in frustration upon seeing the trail of muddy footprints left by Cresswell. "I've been dealing with these issues all morning. First the minister's office was flooded, then the deputy minister's. Problems everywhere. I've had enough." "Let me tell you what's wrong, Wiki," Criswell began, his voice tinged with exasperation. Criswell, panting heavily, suddenly found a burst of energy. He was out of breath, glaring at Tycross, who had accused him. "A torrential downpour ruined our hard work of half a month. The woodland turned into a swamp, and a dozen workers who stayed late to build the stands ended up in St. Mungo's. I spent the entire night drenched in the rain, checking to see if the rest would collapse. I endured all this to ensure you have a seat for the Quidditch World Cup during summer vacation, Wiki. This isn't even my job, yet here you are, yelling at me over a bit of mud." "Oh," Tycross faltered. "Thank you for your selflessness, Dirk. Then, Tycross noticed Atticus Blaine, who was observing the keys, commotion. He didn't recognize him at first, and rolled his eyes in frustration. "Please leave quickly, sir. The hall is a mess right now, and it's not a place for you to watch a spectacle." Atticus raised an eyebrow, but remained silent. Suddenly, Cresswell's eyes widened with excitement, erasing the exhaustion and resentment from his face. He rushed over and grabbed Atticus's hand. "My God, if I'm not mistaken! Oh, how could I?" Cresswell beamed, shaking Atticus's hand vigorously. "The famous Mr. Blaine, I am your loyal fan." "Oh, thanks." Atticus smiled politely, attempting to retrieve his hand, but Dirk held on tightly, leading him toward the elevator hall. "Which floor are you going to, Mr. Blaine?" Criswell asked as they stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for him with enthusiasm. "Well," Atticus pondered for a moment. "Actually, I'm heading to Mr. Crouch's office. I have an appointment with him. That's the 5th floor." Cresswell eagerly informed Atticus about the various departments within the Ministry of Magic. Along the way, Atticus mostly listened, while Dirk Cresswell introduced himself in detail. "I'm a Slytherin, too," he mentioned as they reached the 5th floor. "Back when I was at Hogwarts, Professor Slughorn was still the head of our house. We often correspond about various matters. Just recently we discussed Fenrir Greyback, and he expressed regret." Cresswell noticed the surprise on Atticus's face and quickly clarified, "Not about Greyback, Mr. Blaine, but about you. Slughorn wished he had postponed his retirement so he could have been your headmaster instead of Severus Snape. Snape got lucky." "Ho ho, Please convey my gratitude for his kindness, Atticus chuckled, stopping in front of an office door. I believe this is where I should be. I'll knock for you. Cresswell, misunderstanding Atticus's intent, stepped forward and knocked on the door. You're late. The office was somber, with its old-fashioned decor evoking a sense of the 19th century. The meticulously arranged documents on the shelves suggested that the office's owner was a person of extreme rigor. Barty Crouch stood behind his desk, expressionless, yet his gaze was intense as he looked at Cresswell and Atticus entering. It's not Mr. Blaine's fault, Cresswell interjected before Atticus could explain. To be fair, Mr. Crouch, if the ministry had been generous enough to invest in our infrastructure, the lobby wouldn't be in such disarray now. You know Barty's style, Dirk. He's accustomed to dealing with facts, said Ludo Bagman, the director of the Department of Magical Sports, who was also present in Crouch's office, along with another guest. On the other side of the office, Ludo Bagman was quietly conversing with someone, his voice hushed as they discussed something of importance. The person he was speaking with was defending Barty Crouch. A suitcase rested at the man's feet, suggesting he was preparing to leave. Oh, Cuthbert? Cresswell called out, recognizing the man. What brings you here? Didn't you request leave from the minister to go on vacation? I'm all set for a trip, replied the director of the Ferry Liaison Office, who was Cresswell's immediate superior. He gave the suitcase a light kick and added cheerfully, I'm heading to Paris for a few days. I initially planned to travel using Muggle transportation, but Ludo mentioned they were also going to Paris. Conveniently, I can use the International Flu Network in Buddy's office. Barty was very accommodating and agreed right away. From Barty Crouch's expression, Atticus Blaine could tell that the primary reason for his agreement was to avoid being pestered any further. End of this chapter. Chapter 394, Arriving in Paris. In Barty Crouch's office, Cresswell was seeking guidance from Cuthbert on some tasks, unaware that Cuthbert was preoccupied with a pressing matter involving Ludo Bagman from the Department of Magical Sports. Mr. Crouch sat behind his desk, reviewing the safety plan submitted by Hogwarts. To be frank, Barty was dissatisfied with the plan crafted by Atticus Blaine. The content aside, if any of his subordinates had submitted a report with such a disorganized format, he might have lost his temper. The only reason he tolerated the grammatical errors and typos was because the report bore the signature and approval of Albus Dumbledore. Additionally, Atticus Blaine held a unique status. Beyond being the director of the Hogwarts Student Safety Office, Atticus Blaine was regarded as a hero for his role in eradicating werewolves, a feat celebrated by many in the British wizarding community. He was also favored by the minister and had close ties with several individuals within the ministry. If word got out, it might be misconstrued as an attempt to instigate conflict, which would be unwise given his current unstable position. There are many areas that need revision, Barty Crouch stated flatly after 10 minutes, tossing the plan submitted by Atticus onto the table. He hoped the young man would realize that what he had sent was merely a pile of junk. The time was short, and achieving perfection was indeed challenging. Fortunately, we still have time to make adjustments. Atticus acknowledged Crouch's dissatisfaction, but remained unperturbed, offering a smile. So far, Principal Dumbledore has only instructed me to prepare a safety plan to present to the Competition Judging Committee under the International Federation of Wizards. But what are the specific regulations? We must submit the Hogwarts Safety Plan to the Competition Judging Committee by 8 o'clock in the morning, 3 days from now. At that time, the venue will be closed, and representatives from the 3 schools will present their plans to the committee and undergo consultations. The committee will thoroughly evaluate whether the safety plan can effectively ensure the safety of the young wizards participating in the event. 11 committee members will vote to decide the organizer of the Tri-Wizard tournament after the consultation. Following that, we need to conduct a series of meetings to discuss the event's details, such as the timing of each event, the living and study arrangements for visiting young wizards from the 2 schools, and the specifics of the winner's reward. Finalizing these details may take 1 to 2 months. When Atticus posed his question, Old Barty felt an urge to expel Atticus Blaine from his office and storm into Hogwarts to confront Dumbledore about whether he understood the significance and honor of this event. However, he restrained himself and calmly provided Atticus with a general overview of the regulations. 8 in the morning, 3 days from now? Atticus frowned. That seems like ample time. Why do we need to rush to Paris today? The purpose of the Triwizard Tournament is to foster mutual understanding. Tonight, the Federation will host an internal reception, and representatives from the Ministry of Magic and schools from the 3 countries must attend. With that, Barty Crouch glanced at the wall clock, stood up, and adjusted the collar of his suit. It's time for us to go, Ludo, and Dirk. You didn't. Did you know Cuthbert was on leave today? Why didn't you resolve those issues sooner? Mr. Crouch demanded. Things are always changing, Mr. Crouch, Cresswell replied, clearly frustrated. Like last night, who could have predicted that a heavy rain would cause us such trouble? Upon hearing that a section of the stadium had collapsed, sending a dozen scaffolders to St. Mungo's, Barty Sr. turned pale. This was no minor incident. The families of the injured workers, who hadn't received adequate compensation, would not let the ministry off easily. Moreover, a report from the Daily Prop. Het could cause significant embarrassment for the ministry. If he weren't obligated to travel to Paris, he would have certainly discussed the aftermath with Connolly and Dolores. Go, Barty Crouch ordered everyone in a curt tone. Fall while I can. Traveling through the fireplace felt like being tossed around in a violently turbulent sifter. For a wizard like Atticus Blaine, who could deftly change directions through apparition in battle, or for someone like Barty Crouch, who frequently visited foreign ministries of magic or negotiated international trade deals, it was manageable. However, for Ludo or a young Cuthbert, it was a different story. After both of them stumbled out of the fireplace, they collapsed onto the ground. Cuthbert vomited all over a seamless wool carpet. The waiter in charge of receiving them frowned at the mess. Oh, I'm beginning to doubt my choices, Ludo, Cuthbert said weakly, struggling to his feet. This is worse than Muggle transportation. Trust me, Cuthbert, Ludo replied, recovering first due to his athletic background. He rubbed his ample stomach, a look of reminiscence crossing his face. Muggle transport. I tried it once during a tournament, and it was a nightmare. After leaving the reception room, Cuthbert grabbed his suitcase, bid them a quick farewell, and departed. It seemed he couldn't wait to start his vacation. Now they stood in the hotel's main lobby. The sound of running water outside caught Atticus's attention. He turned to gaze at the Eiffel Tower, Paris's iconic landmark, which loomed like a giant under the rising sun, bathed in golden light. Atticus withdrew his gaze and looked around the hotel with a curious expression. Paris was not unfamiliar to him, yet he had never heard of such a hotel. The hotel's decor had a distinct fairy style. In the center of the rotunda hall stood a massive marble pillar supporting the hotel's structure. Although not particularly versed in history, Atticus recognized the relief carved into the stone pillar. It depicted scenes from 1612 during the Goblin Rebellion, showing wizards in battle. For goblins, this was a holy war, though it ended unfavorably for them. The welcoming wall was a stone facade reaching up to the ceiling, with numerous alcoves carved into its rough surface. These alcoves housed alchemical creations from thriving magical civilizations worldwide, all crafted by goblins. The intricate details throughout the hotel indicated that a goblin was the mastermind behind this magnificent establishment. I was shocked when I first came here, Ludo Bagman exclaimed, finally turning his attention to Atticus after discussing matters with Cuthbert. As the head of the first department of the Ministry of Magic, figures like Barty Crouch or Amelia Bones often exuded an air of authority and superiority. However, Ludo Bagman was different. While Crouch went to check in, Ludo noticed Atticus examining the hotel's furnishings. He bounded over and placed his hand on Atticus's shoulder. Atticus Blaine felt a friendly arm drape over his shoulders as Ludo Bagman chuckled. Those greedy goblins never miss a chance to make a fortune. They've even built a hotel specifically for wizards visiting the International Federation of Wizards for business. They sweetened the deal by donating a hefty sum to the French Ministry of Magic. As a result, this hotel is now the official venue for the ministry to host VIPs. Ludo smacked his lips thoughtfully before shifting the conversation, his eyes twinkling with curiosity as he looked at Atticus. Earlier, in Barty's office, I overheard you discussing the safety plan. So tell me, is Barty grumbling about it as usual? End of this chapter. Chapter 395, Igor Karkaroff. Hey, Mr. Crouch does think that the safety plan submitted by Hogwarts is not perfect, Atticus Blaine remarked, trying to maintain a comfortable distance from others. He placed his hands behind his back, feigning interest in the cultural relics displayed in the stone alcove, and subtly shrugged off Ludo Bagman's arm from his shoulders. "Aho!" Ludo exclaimed, clearly delighted to hear that Barty was dissatisfied with the Hogwarts plan. He bounced around to stand behind Atticus, ignoring the latter's helpless expression as he once again draped an arm over Atticus's shoulder. Ludo's carefree demeanor was a stark contrast to the stability and integrity expected of a director overseeing a major department at the Ministry of Magic. Barty is like that. Everything has to be perfect, even if it's just a punctuation mark, Ludo said cheerfully. But I dare say there's nothing wrong with your plan. Speaking of which, Atticus, is this your first time in Paris? Paris is such a wonderful place. The French really know how to enjoy life. If I were you, I wouldn't bother with those tedious reports. It was a working day, yet not far away, by the shimmering Seine River. Many Muggle men and women strolled leisurely with coffee in hand, while others swam in the river. The pace of life here was indeed much slower than in the UK. Atticus watched the young people laughing and enjoying themselves, a bittersweet smile playing on his lips. Having lived 2 lifetimes, he no longer possessed the carefree attitude to savor life in such a manner. Ludo continued to chatter in Atticus's ear, recounting a delightful encounter he had when he visited Paris for a competition in his youth. However, Barty Crouch, having completed the registration procedures, interrupted Ludo's nostalgic reverie. "We're staying on the 7th floor. I'll have lunch sent to the room. We'll spend the rest of the day revising the plan," Barty Crouch stated, his gaze fixed on Atticus, as if wary that Ludo might distract him from their serious business. The hotel, designated by the International Federation of Wizards and the French Ministry of Magic to accommodate guests, was bustling even on ordinary days. Atticus, Barty, and Ludo were each prominent figures in the wizarding world, and their presence together drew considerable attention. At the previous meeting, many had already noticed Ludo and Atticus conversing, and as they prepared to leave the hall, several wizards who recognized them approached, hoping for autographs. 2 Quidditch enthusiasts even followed them to the elevator, but Barty Crouch's cold stare made them retreat awkwardly. "Don't be so aloof, Barty," Ludo chided, smacking his lips in disapproval. "We're here to foster friendship between different magical cultures. You should be more welcoming to these international friends." Ludo's point was valid, yet Barty Crouch remained silent, his expression stern. Atticus sensed that Barty was reluctant to engage too much with Ludo, especially in his presence. The hotel's layout was cylindrical, with all rooms built around a massive central pillar. Opposite the elevator doors, a mural on the stone pillar depicted the end of the Goblin Jihad, with goblins using the pig's head bar as their base to resist the wizard army's onslaught. The 7th floor was the hotel's highest, and as Atticus stood on the circular platform, he noticed something carved into the ceiling. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was a map indicating the general locations of all Gringotts branches worldwide, with the Gringotts headquarters in Paris prominently marked at the center, the depths of his suitcase. He glanced at the clock, noting the time, and sighed. Working with Barty Crouch was proving to be more challenging than he had anticipated. Their interactions were strictly professional, with little room for personal rapport. Atticus Blaine, as he was now known, had been staying at the hotel where the British Ministry of Magic hosted its guests. Unlike the Muggle-run establishment he was used to, this French hotel was a testament to opulence and indulgence. When Batty led him and Ludo to the room, Atticus expected grandeur, but the reality surpassed his imagination. As the door swung open, Atticus was greeted by an enchanting sight. Instead of a typical hotel room, there was a vast courtyard with a verdant lawn, where elegant peacocks roamed freely. In the center stood a magnificent fountain sculpture, its water cascading gracefully. Lush sycamore trees lined the stone path, leading to a pristine three-story villa nestled in a tranquil forest. Above, a soft, glowing orb hung in the sky, mimicking the sun's position at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, while a few immaculate clouds accentuated the azure expanse. The French certainly know how to enjoy life, Atticus mused aloud, unable to contain his admiration. Ludo, ever the enthusiast, chimed in. Staying here isn't cheap, you know? If you weren't an invited VIP, you'd have to shell out 200 galleons a day. The ministry is sparing no expense to secure the honor of hosting. Otherwise, Batty wouldn't have agreed to such costs. Barty Crouch, however, was less impressed. Ludo, focus. Albus's inability to easily outmaneuver those two schools indicates the gravity of our situation. If our plans aren't foolproof, we're doomed. Atticus, sensing the tension, interjected, Have we considered other options, perhaps dealing with the committee members privately? Ludo chuckled. Bribing the review committee? The minister hinted at it, but it's impossible. Why? Atticus inquired. The committee members have signed magical contracts prohibiting them from accepting any benefits from the competing parties, Paris replied coldly. Thankfully, such regulations exist, or Beauxbatons would have already started preparing the competition venue. Atticus smiled knowingly. Having dealt with numerous contracts, he understood that magical agreements often had exploitable loopholes. As he had anticipated, he and Barty Crouch were tasked with revising the plan, while Ludo, after depositing his luggage, conveniently found an excuse to leave. Atticus and Barty were relieved. Neither wanted a third party's constant chatter while they worked. The day passed with Atticus and Barty confined to their hotel room. After savoring an authentic French lunch, Atticus took a leisurely stroll around the courtyard. Working with Barty was a test of patience, as their only common ground was maintaining a professional distance. Conversations were limited to the task at hand, with no room for idle chatter. As the clock struck 5:30 p.m., half an hour before the dinner party, Atticus carefully folded the preliminary plan and retrieved a long unused dress robe from his suitcase. He prepared himself for the evening, knowing that the challenges of the day were far from over. Atticus Blaine carefully packed his suitcase, reminding himself of the importance of maintaining a disciplined appearance. He was no longer just representing himself. He was a representative of Hogwarts. Wearing an old wizard robe to the reception would surely invite ridicule. The reception is on the 2nd floor. We can't be late, Batty announced. She was dressed impeccably in a black evening gown, not a single wrinkle in sight, as she hurried across the courtyard toward the entrance. Atticus followed closely behind, adjusting his tie. What about Ludo? Doesn't he have to attend? He asked casually. Oh, I think he's already there, Barty Crouch replied with a hint of sarcasm. As they reached the entrance, Barty abruptly stopped on the stone path and opened the door. Just then, a man passing by noticed the commotion. He glanced over, then halted in his tracks. What? The tall, thin man with a goatee standing at the door wore an unnatural expression. However, he quickly forced a greasy smile, revealing his yellowed teeth. I didn't expect to see you here, Batty. Hello, Barty Crouch replied stiffly, nodding. Karkaroff. End of this chapter. Chapter 396. Gathering Igor Karkaroff, the headmaster of Durmstrang Institute, was a name that Atticus Blaine had heard during his travels across Europe. While in Germany, he had listened to wizards discuss Durmstrang and its current headmaster, Igor Karkaroff. Among the 3 renowned magical schools in Europe, Durmstrang was known for its less conventional approach. The school maintained many traditional teaching methods, which meant it didn't strictly differentiate between black and white magic. This environment had once nurtured dangerous wizards like Gellert Grindelwald. Under Karkaroff's leadership, Durmstrang's liberal teaching methods had reached new heights. Rumors suggested that he tacitly allowed professors to teach the dark arts, and whispers of his past as a Death Eater lingered. Barty Crouch's evident disdain for Karkaroff lent some credibility to these rumors. Barty's cold demeanor did nothing to unsettle Karkaroff, who maintained a warm smile. His gaze shifted to Atticus, initially puzzled, but soon recognizing the young man standing behind Barty Crouch. Atticus, despite his youth, seemed more like Barty's subordinate. If my eyes don't deceive me, Karkaroff's blue eyes sparkled as he extended his hand past Barty to Atticus, his tone laced with intrigue. "This must be Hogwarts Director of Student Safety, Mr. Atticus Blaine?" "Nice to meet you, Professor Karkaroff," Atticus replied, shaking Karkaroff's rough hand with a serious smile. "Ah, I didn't expect Dumbledore to send you, Professor Blaine. It seems he's quite determined to secure the host position for this Triwizard tournament," Karkaroff remarked slyly. "Your reputation precedes you, even at Durmstrang. Recently, the students were abuzz with tales of you defeating Fenrir Greyback. They could hardly believe a wizard could single-handedly vanquish so many werewolves. My staff and I are quite intrigued by your fiendfire. Spirit fire. It's a fascinating spell, isn't it?" "Hey, it's just a minor trick," Atticus replied modestly. "But I didn't expect to be popular at Durmstrang. I'll have to tell Dumbledore. If he doesn't give me a raise, I might threaten to transfer to Durmstrang to teach." Atticus's jest elicited a hearty laugh from Karkaroff, though Atticus noted the absence of genuine mirth in his eyes. Karkaroff was like a smiling tiger, not to be underestimated. "We don't have time for pleasantries. The reception is about to begin," Barty interjected, his patience with Karkaroff's laughter wearing thin. With a stern expression, he headed towards the elevator hall. Karkaroff's eyes briefly flickered with shadows at Barty's brusque behavior. "Barty and I have known each other for years," Karkaroff quipped. His quick temper hasn't changed a bit. "Really?" Atticus feigned interest, stepping forward. "How did you two meet?" Cough. Karkaroff was caught off guard by Atticus's question, momentarily at a loss for words. After a couple of awkward coughs, he replied lightly, "Just business contacts. You know, running a school isn't easy. We need to procure many teaching supplies, and some materials from the UK require Barty's approval." In his haste to distance himself from Karkaroff, Barty Crouch didn't even allow. The elevator had been waiting for them, but it descended to the second floor. When Atticus Blaine entered the banquet hall, Barty and several wizards from the International Wizards Union were already engaged in conversation. As expected, Ludo Bagman was present, his face adorned with a cheerful smile as he chatted with a group of people around him. In contrast to the goblin-style decor of the hotel's main body, the banquet hall was more aligned with wizard aesthetics. A massive crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling of the square hall, and artistic sculptures adorned the white walls on all sides. The air was filled with the pleasant fragrance of flowers, and the silverware for wine and pastries was exquisitely crafted. The hall buzzed with noise as everyone engaged in lively conversations with those around them. To Atticus, this felt more like a social gathering than a preparatory meeting to decide the host of the Triwizard tournament. No wonder Dumbledore was reluctant to attend, Atticus mused inwardly. Wasn't the Triwizard tournament supposed to be kept secret during its preparatory stages? With so many wizards of varying attire and skin color present, was secrecy truly necessary? "Oh, you're here first, Karkaroff." Atticus was surveying the meeting place when a deep voice from the door caught his attention. He turned his head, his eyebrows raising slightly. A woman nearly as tall as Hagrid appeared at the entrance, leading a girl who seemed to be a student. Madame Maxime and Mademoiselle Delacour." Karkaroff displayed his yellow teeth in an exaggerated smile, striding forward and even grabbing Atticus's arm. The newcomers were quite striking. Madame Maxime was slightly taller than Hagrid, though much slimmer, which accentuated her height. She had to duck her head to pass through the brightly lit entrance. Beside her was a girl with an outstanding presence, about Percy's age, with silver hair cascading down to her waist. Under the bright candlelight of the banquet hall, her creamy skin emitted a subtle, warm glow. In terms of demeanor, she was comparable to Vitia Creona, though she lacked a bit of natural warmth. Among the attendees, Atticus was also quite noticeable. Despite being much younger than the generally older participants, he showed no stage fright. He stood tall and straight, exuding a calm and handsome demeanor. Whenever he made eye contact with those lavender eyes, it felt as if there was an abyss capable of freezing the soul. "That cunning fellow Dumbledore has a new representative, Madame Maxime." Karkaroff grinned, pointing at Atticus with an unadulterated smile. "Mr. Atticus Blaine, I think you must have heard of his name. He's a formidable opponent. I think we're doomed, aren't we?" Hearing this, Atticus glanced at Karkaroff calmly, a flash of thunder briefly lighting up his eyes. Karkaroff, who was about to stir trouble, suddenly felt a tightness in his chest, and his grip on Atticus's arm loosened unconsciously. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Blaine." Madame Maxime extended her large hand, adorned with luxurious opals, offering a friendly smile to Atticus. "I've heard of the amazing things you've done. Truly remarkable." "It's just luck," Atticus replied modestly, raising his hand to shake Madame Maxime's, then politely nodding at Miss Delacour, who was observing him with great interest. He was about to speak further when a commotion from the main stage of the banquet hall caught his attention. A group of ladies, elegant as fairies, had appeared. The women in elegant gowns entered through the small door behind the main stage, gracefully ascending the side steps with their musical instruments in hand. Each of these ladies was stunningly beautiful, enveloped in bright pink lights and accompanied by pixies with transparent wings fluttering around them. Once on stage, they settled into their seats, carefully adjusting their violins and other stringed instruments. "The Mountain Fairy Group," Fleur Delacour explained to Atticus Blaine in her silvery voice. "They are famous in France." End of this chapter. Chapter 397, The Reception. In the opulent banquet hall, esteemed wizards from all over the world sipped wine to the lively tunes playing in the background. Atticus Blaine, who had attended only a handful of such receptions, found himself amidst this grandeur. Not long ago, after gaining fame for defeating Greyback, he lingered in London to collaborate with the Ministry of Magic. During that period, invitations to receptions poured in, and Atticus chose to attend several. This current gathering bore similarities to those in London, yet he was no longer the focal point of attention. Barty Crouch, along with senior officials from the French and German ministries of magic, was encircled by a throng of admirers. Madame Maxime of Beauxbatin and Headmaster Karkaroff of Durmstrang engaged in conversation with representatives from the International Wizards Union. Meanwhile, Ludo seemed to have abandoned his duties, boasting about his career to anyone who would listen. A young girl accompanying Madame Maxime also drew considerable attention. Many guests feigned casual strolls past her, eager for a closer look. Despite the distractions, Atticus was never without company. The guests were particularly intrigued by his encounter with Greyback and the Basilisk. The legend of the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets had captivated imaginations for centuries, and many coveted the secret treasure rumored to be hidden within. However, few expressed genuine awe towards Atticus. The wizards present were leaders in their respective magical communities, and mere tales of werewolf slaying were insufficient to impress these proud individuals. In their eyes, the extent of Dumbledore's involvement in the werewolf incident remained uncertain. Some speculated that Albus Dumbledore orchestrated events to elevate Atticus Blaine's status, crafting a compelling narrative. After some time, Barty extricated himself from discussions with the German and French officials. His keen eyes scanned the room, noting the actions of those worth observing. When his gaze settled on Atticus, a flicker of surprise crossed his falcon-like eyes. It was unusual for such a young wizard to command attention. In the Ministry of Magic, wizards in their early 20s often still bore the intern label, much like the talented Tonks under Rufus's mentorship, who remained an apprentice auror. "Atticus," Barty began, setting aside his biases for the moment. He picked up a wineglass and approached. The wizards surrounding Atticus discreetly withdrew, recognizing Barty's arrival. With a slightly stiff smile, Barty and Atticus exchanged a toast, each taking a sip of sherry. "How do you find the reception?" Barty inquired. "The wine is excellent, and the wizards here are quite amiable," Atticus replied with a subtle smile. Barty understood the underlying message. His beard twitched slightly. "But the purpose of this reception isn't merely for socializing," he remarked, casting a cold glance at Madame Maxime and Fleur Delacour, who gracefully handled the attention of self-assured wizards. "Madame Maxime's intentions in bringing that popular Beauxbatin student are far from innocent. She seeks to win favor through her. You might not be aware, Atticus, but this girl has Vila heritage." Atticus glanced at Fleur Delacour, who exuded confidence with her radiant smile. Atticus Blaine smiled knowingly. How could he not recognize it? How many purebred Vila had he encountered before? So, Atticus cast a sidelong glance at Igor Karkaroff, who was busy complimenting an elderly wizard with a long white beard, Karkaroff seems quite the gentleman, and he came alone. A gentleman. Batty's mouth twitched slightly as he replied coldly. Yes, you see what Karkaroff is, right? From what I know, there are notable figures at Durmstrang. It's not that he didn't want to bring the students, but their Quidditch stars are currently preparing for the World Cup and simply can't leave. These tactics aren't very clever, Atticus remarked, sipping his sherry with a hint of amusement. If that's all it takes, I could head back to Hogwarts and bring Harry Potter over. His fame wouldn't lose to theirs. Batty shot Atticus a disapproving look. He had hoped Atticus would be more cautious, but Atticus seemed unfazed. The wizard Karkaroff is speaking with is named Vip Dragon. Have you heard of him? Batty asked in a low voice. Vip Dragon, Atticus mused for a moment before responding slowly. Yes, the name rings a bell. He worked with the Federation for many years. After Grindelwald's fall, he gained significant prestige for hunting down extremists. He aspired to rise further, but when Mrs. Vickia Santos stepped down as the chair of the International Federation of Wizards, all the ministries of magic agreed to appoint Dumbledore. It's said he was quite displeased with this and has been at odds with Dumbledore within the Federation. He's one of the 11 jury members, and 2 others on the jury have close ties with him, Batty said, his tone grim. That's why Karkaroff is currying favor with him. Upon hearing this, Atticus frowned slightly. It was clear that Vip Dragon harbored hostility towards Hogwarts. If he were alone, it might not be a concern, but if he could sway the decisions of the other 2, he could effectively determine who would host the 3rd event, a strong competition indeed. If Dumbledore were here, Vip Dragon might not dare to speak out publicly, but since he's absent now, Atticus nodded. You think he'll seize the opportunity? None of us can vouch for his character, Batty replied dryly. Batty departed, as the review committee wasn't the only group present at the banquet. Madame Maxime was also seeking support from other committee members, and Batty intended to do the same. Atticus observed Karkaroff and Vip Dragon conversing calmly. Batty's intentions were clear. He hoped Atticus could sway Vip Dragon, but it wouldn't be easy. Without some form of incentive, it would be challenging to overcome his bias and make a fair decision. Batty had also mentioned that the committee members had signed a magical contract prohibiting them from accepting benefits from the 3 parties involved in the election. Of course, there were more subtle methods, but Atticus was still contemplating whether to intimidate or entice. Mr. Blaine, a clear voice suddenly called from behind Atticus. He turned to see the young girl of Vila descent from Beauxbatons. Atticus raised an eyebrow and smiled. What can I do for you, Miss Delacour? Oh, Fleur Delacour shrugged, attempting to project confidence, but under the intense gaze of the handsome man before her, her smile faltered slightly. It was truly strange. Fleur thought. She usually didn't feel this awkward around men. I just thought we should get to know each other, don't you think? I mean, we each represent Beauxbatons and Hogwarts in the Triwizard Tournament. With a twinkle in his eyes, Atticus Blaine nodded knowingly. Are you trying to persuade me to support Beauxbatons Academy of Magic as the host of the Triwizard Tournament? End of this chapter. Chapter 398, The Reception. Oh, what? Of course not! Fleur exclaimed, momentarily taken aback. Then she noticed the twinkle in Atticus Blaine's eyes and realized he was merely jesting. So are you truly willing to support Beauxbatons? You know, it is the greatest magic school in Europe. Regaining her composure, Fleur's eyes sparkled as she smiled playfully. I have my reservations about that, Atticus chuckled. Fleur's English was quite good, though tinged with a charming French accent. She began to share details about Beauxbatons Academy of Magic and the local customs of France with Atticus. For a young witch who had yet to graduate, Fleur's knowledge was impressive, though it couldn't quite match Atticus's, who had traveled extensively. However, Atticus chose not to correct her minor inaccuracies, maintaining a polite smile instead. I have a sister named Gabrielle, Fleur continued. When the basilisk from the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets was exhibited in France, our magical creatures professor took us to see it. Oh, it was a terrifying creature. Gabrielle had nightmares for days afterward. It's hard to imagine how you managed to subdue such a beast. Fleur placed a hand on her chest, her eyes wide with anticipation. eager to hear a thrilling tale. Atticus could tell that this young girl wasn't here to gather information. She was simply intrigued by him. The irony wasn't lost on him. Accustomed to a life of solitude, he hadn't expected to catch the attention of a schoolgirl he'd just met. "Heh, there was an element of luck involved," Atticus replied with a modest smile, steering the conversation away. He wasn't one for boasting like Gilderoy Lockhart. "Speaking of which," Atticus said, pouring himself a glass of wine to create some distance, "when the Tri-Wizard tournament officially begins, will you be representing Beauxbatons, Miss Delacour?" "Certainly," Fleur replied, brushing her long silver hair back. Her large blue eyes sparkled, and her laughter, like the tinkling of silver bells, captivated those who were secretly watching. "No matter which school hosts the tournament, I will represent Beauxbatons. I've studied the selection process and believe I can pass the Goblet of Fire's test. Then I hope your dreams come true and you achieve great success in the tournament, Miss Delacour," Atticus said, realizing it was time to make his exit before the envious glances surrounding them became overwhelming. He raised his glass to Fleur, and after a brief sip, he smiled. "I think it's time for us to part for now, Miss Delacour. I noticed Mr. Crouch signaling me from over there. I believe he has something to discuss. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening." A booming voice suddenly cut through the chatter in the banquet hall, providing Atticus with the perfect excuse to slip away. He turned to see Karkaroff, leaving Vip Dragern's side, his gaze fixed on the stage with keen interest. The speaker, representing the International Confederation of Wizards, was addressing the Ministry of Magic officials and the entourages of the 3 magical schools gathered that night. The Forest Fairy Troupe, performing on stage, paused their music as the crowd formed a semicircle in front of the stage. "It is with great joy that the International Confederation of Wizards welcomes this evening Mr. Barty Crouch, Director of the Department of International Magical Cooperation at the British Ministry of Magic, and Mr. Ludo Bagman of the Department of Magical Sports. The rekindling of the Goblet of Fire, extinguished for centuries, is a testament to the efforts of Mr. Crouch and Mr. Bagman. I believe everyone here owes them a debt of gratitude," Vip Dragon declared, raising his glass in a toast to Batty and Ludo. Following his lead, the rest of the attendees lifted their glasses in unison. Batty, with a forced smile, nodded slightly in acknowledgement, though his eyes betrayed a sense of wariness when they met Vip Dragon's gaze. In contrast, Ludo beamed brightly, waving enthusiastically to the crowd. "And of course, we must also extend our thanks to Mr. Igor Karkaroff and Madame Olympe Maxime," Vip Dragon continued, his voice tinged with urgency as the applause and cheers for Ludo subsided. "It is due to the enthusiastic participation of Beauxbatons and Durmstrang that the Tri-Wizard tournament has come to life." Atticus Blaine squinted, catching Batty's eye as a reminder. "Oh, fostering communication between different magical cultures has always been our goal, Mr. Dragon," Karkaroff interjected smoothly, his eyes darting about. "However, Mr. Dragon, I noticed you omitted a key player. Hogwarts, under Albus Dumbledore's leadership, has also been a proponent of friendly exchanges, hasn't it?" "Ah, of course, I haven't forgotten," Vip replied, his gray beard twitching with amusement. "But Mr. Dumbledore is our president, and promoting exchanges is part of his role, so I don't see the need to thank him specifically." Sparse laughter rippled through the crowd, with some shaking their heads in mild disapproval of Dragon's remark. A few cast glances at Atticus Blaine, tinged with a hint of schadenfreude. Suddenly, Dragon shifted his focus directly to Atticus, representing Hogwarts. A fleeting look of disdain and predation crossed his eyes, though his face maintained a sincere smile. "That was just a light-hearted jest. Of course, we must thank Hogwarts for its positive response. Here, we welcome a new friend, representing Hogwarts in place of Mr. Albus Dumbledore, Mr. Atticus Blaine." With a composed smile, Atticus nodded to the assembly. "Oh, Mr. Blaine, why not come up and introduce yourself?" Dragon suggested humorously. "Or are you reluctant to part from the lovely Miss Delacour?" The crowd erupted into chuckles, both good-natured and otherwise, while a flicker of embarrassment and anger flashed in Fleur's blue eyes, clearly disliking the jest. "Go on, speak to everyone, Atticus." Ludo encouraged, seemingly oblivious to Vip Dragon's ulterior motives, as he waved excitedly at Atticus. "Indeed," Atticus replied, choosing a path between coercion and charm. He stepped forward, meeting the varied gazes with a confident smile. Perhaps you aren't aware, but before I became the head of the Hogwarts Student Security Office, I was a professor of defense against the dark arts. Miss Delacour's profound knowledge and magical talent have truly impressed me, and I look forward to learning about Beauxbaton's advanced teaching methods from her. This time, the laughter was mostly warm, and even Madame Maxime offered Atticus a friendly smile. Batty's eyes held a trace of sarcasm, not directed at Atticus, but at the cunning Vip Dragon, who likely underestimated Atticus as a young, inexperienced wizard who had only recently gained recognition of Dumbledore. So he dragged Atticus Blaine out to express his frustrations about Dumbledore. Despite his dissatisfaction, Batty knew that Atticus Blaine was not someone who could be easily manipulated, whether in terms of strength or intelligence. End of this chapter. Chapter 399. The Reception. When Atticus Blaine deftly used a witty and elegant remark to dispel the negative impact of his earlier jokes, Vip Dragorn immediately realized that the young man before him, launched by Albus Dumbledore, was not as simple as he seemed. A trace of hesitation crept into Dragorn's heart. He was wary of offending Dumbledore too much. At that moment, Karkaroff interjected, "No need to be modest, Mr. Blaine." A playful smile danced on Karkaroff's lips. Everyone knows that Hogwarts is the oldest magic school in Europe and remains the greatest today. Both Beauxbatons and Durmstrang have learned much from Hogwarts' teaching methods. Exactly, murmured the wizards gathered from around the world, each having graduated from different magical academies. Karkaroff's statement pricked their self-esteem, and Dragorn, sensing their faint dissatisfaction, quickly made up his mind. With a smile, he agreed. The purpose of our gathering here is to select the host school for the Triwizard Tournament, but I think Hogwarts has already secured the victory, right? Oh, I've worked with Dumbledore for many years. He must be confident enough to temporarily change representatives. This was precisely why Atticus Blaine was reluctant to engage with the so-called high society. These people thrived on intrigue and eccentricity, always designing traps for their opponents. Within the stable social rules, he had to remain vigilant against the desire to solve everything by force. I agree with part of Principal Karkaroff's statement. Atticus smiled at Karkaroff, his disbelief evident. As we all know, Hogwarts is indeed the oldest of the 3 wizarding schools in Europe. But when it comes to greatness, my personal opinion is that every wizarding school is a cradle of magical civilization, and they are all great. The word great cannot be quantified by most. Atticus glanced sideways at Dragorn, continuing before he could refute. As for why Headmaster Dumbledore temporarily asked me to represent Hogwarts, Mr. Dragorn, Atticus chuckled. Perhaps he doesn't want to steal your limelight. Laughter and applause filled the magnificent banquet hall, and many attendees looked at Atticus Blaine with admiration, marveling at the adaptability of this rising star in the European magic world. Fleur's large blue eyes were alight with interest as she watched Atticus. Although she believed Beauxbatons was not inferior to Hogwarts, she had to admit there was no wizard like Atticus Blaine at Beauxbatons. He was handsome, elegant, and witty, and his reputation suggested he was a powerful wizard. Considering his age, Atticus Blaine had a bright future ahead. Batty's expression was complicated. While Atticus's excellent response reflected well on the British Minister of Magic, Batty couldn't be entirely pleased, thinking of Amelia, whom Atticus secretly supported. However, Batty's eyes held a hint of satisfaction when they landed on Dragorn, who was struggling to maintain his composure after being teased by Atticus. It seems our Mr. Atticus Blaine possesses more than just outstanding skills, Dragorn said with a smile, attempting to regain control of the situation. Oh, speaking of skill. Vip Dragorn's eyes widened as he patted Atticus's back in a feigned gesture of camaraderie. We all know that Mr. Albus Dumbledore is the most powerful wizard in the contemporary wizarding world. Now it seems there is another extraordinary wizard at Hogwarts. Why don't you let everyone? Do you see it? Your incredible magic is the best way to let everyone know you, isn't it? Barty Crouch mused quietly. Vip Dragon seemed to think that Atticus Blaine was a mere charlatan, his quick wit and exceptional magical skills nothing more than fabrications by the Daily Prophet. But Barty knew better. He had heard from Connolly, Dolores, and Rufus about the chilling fire they witnessed upon arriving at Hogsmeade. Since the legendary duel between Dumbledore and Grindelwald, nothing this astonishing has happened in over half a century. I mean a single pulling. Urson battling 100 ferocious werewolves, Dragan said, his eyes sparkling with admiration as he gazed at Atticus. I think everyone here would love to see your extraordinary magic. Come on, Atticus, show us your abilities. If it's thrilling enough, it might even earn Hogwarts some extra points in the selection. Atticus's hesitation made Dragan believe he had found a way to make him look foolish. Dragan increasingly suspected that the astonishing feats reported in the newspapers were orchestrated by Dumbledore to hand over power to Atticus. In fact, many in the European magical community shared this skepticism. After all, it seemed unusual for a previously unknown wizard to suddenly rise to prominence. Albus Dumbledore had built his reputation over time, starting during his years at Hogwarts, eventually becoming a revered magician. In contrast, Atticus Blaine's fame had skyrocketed in just a year due to certain events, making him a household name. Demonstrate the magic. Atticus sighed inwardly, realizing he had been cornered into this situation. His biggest flaw was the mysterious gap between his graduation from Hogwarts and his return. That was indeed a bit troublesome. Hey, Mr. Dragan, what do you suggest I do? Atticus asked with feigned interest. Of course, we need an opponent, Vip Dragan exclaimed excitedly. He scanned the gathered crowd, pretending to search for a suitable challenger for Atticus. Suddenly, his gaze settled on Fleur Delacour, who was also hoping to showcase her skills. With a hint of surprise, he called out, "Only you, Mademoiselle Fleur Delacour. I think you are a suitable opponent." "What?" Fleur exclaimed in astonishment, not expecting to be singled out from the crowd. "I think this is probably not a good choice, Mr. Dragan," Madame Maxime interjected, her voice tinged with anger. "Fleur is indeed Beauxbaton's best student, but I think everyone can understand that there is still a significant gap between her and Mr. Blaine. This is not a fair match." "If you want an evenly matched duel, Madame Maxime," Karkaroff chimed in, "then Dumbledore himself would have to participate. None of us here can handle a 1,000-year-old basilisk alone, or 100 ferocious werewolves." Though Karkaroff was joking, his eyes remained cold and devoid of humor. "Exactly," Dragan clapped his hands, agreeing with Karkaroff. "Miss Delacour is still a student at Beauxbaton, and Mr. Blaine is a professor. This is a rare opportunity, isn't it? If she can receive his guidance, perhaps Miss Delacour will benefit greatly." Cunning fellow. Anyone with a clear mind could see through Dragan's scheme. Atticus Blaine must not lose to Fleur Delacour, right? In such a case, his reputation would be tarnished. Of course, he couldn't engage in a fierce battle either, as that would be equally embarrassing for Atticus. But if Fleur Delacour were to be defeated decisively, Madame Maxime's pride would be wounded. End of this chapter. Chapter 400. The Reception. Vip Dragan wanted to stir up some excitement at Hogwarts, and Igor Karkaroff from Durmstrang was eager to create a spectacle involving both Hogwarts and Beauxbatons. Most of the guests in the banquet hall were quick to catch on to Dragan and Karkaroff's scheme to set up Atticus Blaine. Dragan's explanation failed to fully convince Madame Maxime. She was displeased and seemed ready to speak up, but seeing her favorite student, Fleur, visibly moved, she hesitated and swallowed her words. Fleur had always been Beauxbaton's star pupil. Her Vila heritage granted her striking beauty, and her exceptional magical talent made her popular among her peers. Perhaps, Madame Maxime thought, allowing her to face a small challenge wouldn't be such a bad thing. With this in mind, she chose to remain silent and subtly signaled the officials from the French Ministry of Magic to hold their tongues. Old Barty Crouch glared coldly at Vip, irritated by his stubbornness. He resolved to have a word with Dumbledore later and ensure Dragan was given a stern warning. However, his immediate concern was to caution Atticus against falling into their trap. Yet when Barty noticed Atticus's calm demeanor and steady gaze, his own anxiety eased. "Don't be shy, Atticus," Ludo Bagman exclaimed cheerfully. "Let's see what you're made of." Dragan's machinations didn't faze Atticus, but Ludo's eagerness to witness the spectacle brought a frown to Atticus's face. Was Ludo truly as foolish as the rumors suggested, or did he have ulterior motives? Atticus also noticed the anticipation in Fleur's blue eyes and couldn't help but chuckle inwardly. After all, she was just a young girl, not yet graduated, with a pure heart. She was probably the only person in the banquet hall genuinely interested in seeing his skills. In that case, Atticus's thoughts raced, and after a few moments, he turned to Fleur with a smile. "Miss Delacour, shall we have a friendly competition?" Dragon and Karkaroff's faces lit up with joy, but before they could speak, Atticus continued. "However, I have a suggestion regarding the format of the competition." "How do you propose we do it?" Fleur asked, stepping gracefully into the center of attention, her interest piqued. "My humble opinion is that since the Triwizard Tournament is meant to foster mutual friendship, and this reception is a prelude to that event, it would be inappropriate for us to engage in a direct duel," Atticus said, swirling his crystal wineglass with a playful smirk. "I have an idea. Since Mr. Vipdragon suggested the competition, why not have him participate as well?" Vip's expression shifted dramatically. Before he could extricate himself from the situation, Atticus proposed, "Let's have both of us compete against Mr. Vip separately. The challenge will be to see who can disarm Mr. Vip the fastest." "I think this is a very fitting proposal," Barty Crouch interjected, stepping forward with a nonchalant smile and clapping his hands. "It's not appropriate." Vipdragon's face darkened. He couldn't imagine being disarmed by a young, ungraduated girl, but Atticus's suggestion effectively turned the tables on him, presenting a challenge he had not anticipated. He was now the center of attention, representing both Beauxbaton and the French Ministry of Magic. "I think it's very appropriate," Barty asserted, raising his voice to cut off Dragon's objections. He then turned to Fleur with a gentle smile. "I don't believe Miss Delacour would refuse such a dignified and revealing method of competition, would she?" To be honest, Fleur clearly wanted to compete with Atticus Blaine, but she found it difficult to refuse Mr. Blaine's suggestion. As she hesitated, Fleur noticed Mrs. Nod. "I think Mr. Blaine has a good idea," Mrs. Nod said, nodding, though her expression was tinged with regret. It seemed Ludo wasn't the only troublemaker in the crowd. In an instant, the dining tables across the banquet hall were magically moved to the walls, creating a spacious area. However, it took some me to prepare, as Fleur couldn't exactly dance with swords and guns in high heels and a low-cut dress that accentuated her curves. "Good job," someone remarked, as all eyes turned to Fleur Delacour, eager to participate, and Vipdragon, who looked rather sullen. Barty took the opportunity to approach the smiling Atticus and whispered something to him. To be honest, Barty's praise surprised Atticus, as he knew the director of the International Magic Cooperation Department wasn't particularly fond of him. "The real show is about to begin," Atticus said, taking a sip of sherry, raising his eyebrows with a smile. So, Fleur, now changed back into her Beauxbaton school uniform, held her wand with a heroic stance, ready for a duel. Her preparation earned applause from many. "Excuse my offense, Mr. Dragon," she said. "Oh, I hope my old bones can last a little longer," Dragon replied, trying to maintain his composure despite his irritation. Under the star-like candlelight, a bright red light from Fleur's wand signaled the start of the competition. It was evident that Beauxbatons offered courses similar to dueling classes, as Fleur wasn't just waving her wand aimlessly. She demonstrated the standard skills expected of young wizards. Vipdragon, who had participated in the pursuit of remaining wizards after Grindelwald's downfall, was a powerful wizard with exceptional abilities. No one, not even Madame Maxime, expected Fleur to succeed in disarming Vipdragon, and indeed she didn't. In a typical duel, Dragon's main concern was to perform well without overwhelming the young Beauxbaton student, ensuring Madame Maxime wouldn't be embarrassed. However, 3 minutes later, a gray curse light struck Fleur's wrist, causing her to lose her balance and drop her wand. "Ah," Fleur exclaimed, stomping her foot in frustration. "I failed." Many people smiled, but no one wanted to tell her the harsh truth. "You almost had it, Mademoiselle Delacour," Dragon said, maintaining his pace and wiping sweat from his forehead, his smile reflecting the demeanor of a senior expert. "To be honest, I've never seen a young wizard as talented as you. I bet, Miss Delacour, you'll be a strong contender for the Triwizard Tournament Championship. Your future is limitless. Of course, none of this would be possible without Beauxbaton's excellent teaching methods." Even Madame Maxime's expression softened at these words, and Dragon's earlier mercy, and she didn't mind Vip Dragon's involvement in Fleur's little ambitions. "Well, it's your turn, Mr. Blaine," someone announced. Losing to a renowned wizard wasn't too embarrassing for Fleur, especially after receiving such high praise. Fleur smiled, her expression like that of a little girl who had received her favorite Christmas gift. She walked briskly to Atticus, looking at him with a mix of pride and challenge. "I hope the following presentation will enlighten you, Mademoiselle Delacour," Atticus said cheerfully, handing his wineglass to Barty Crouch. With everyone's eager anticipation, he took the stage. The air, once relaxed, quickly filled with tension. Everyone watched intently. Atticus Blaine's abilities were a topic of much curiosity. Although the Daily Prophet had published detailed reports, everyone was aware of the newspaper's political bias. Even if the reporters had accurately conveyed the villagers of Hogsmeade's accounts, how much insight could a group of simple folk truly offer? Perhaps their tales were nothing more than the exaggerated boasts of idle minds. "You're right, Mr. Blaine," Dragon remarked, a predatory gleam in his eyes. He observed Atticus, who was dressed in a sharp black suit that accentuated his stature. Hopefully, this matchup will inspire those who witness it. Atticus chuckled softly, but remained silent. Under the scrutiny of the crowd, he began to pat down his pockets. As he continued, his expression shifted to one of concern. "What's the matter, Atticus?" Barty Crouch inquired, his brow furrowed with worry. "Oh," Atticus replied, shaking his sleeves once more. After a moment, he spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. "It seems I've forgotten my wand." End of this chapter.